Further events took place in the kingdom of Noja on its border where the barony of Babylon was located. In these lands, nicknamed the Nether Territories, one of our stories took place. A certain girl thought of Lord Ree. Through the actions of the newly appointed Lord, many changes will take place. Out for a walk to enjoy the praises of the residents, Mr. Ree suddenly became a hero. It all started one day. Amidst a pile of buildings, two guys were huddled together, yelling at each other. One was yelling at the other not to fuck with him, calling him a buddy. He's laughing at him, an ex-con. The other guy with bandages on asked what the fuck he was talking about. Or does he want him to infect him? A lot of people here were on drugs and sleeping on the streets. Prostitution was rampant in this city. The streets were littered with shabby, thin people who looked sick. A passing guy was accosted by a girl who told him she would offer him a sweet price. As he passed her, she got angry and shouted at him not to ignore her, "You degenerate with a flaccid cock." Steal. Running past the two was a very young boy who was running away from a man who was running after him and yelling that he was a fucking asshole. There was a scream. Someone was yelling about a demonic beast. From nowhere, an enraged vulture came out of nowhere and let out a deafening roar. A skinny old man holding a stick shouted that damn that beast. Before he could do anything, blood spurted on the beast's hoof. People call this place the Babylonian Hell. Then the guy sitting at the table shouted that he couldn't take it anymore. This land is desolate and infested with vermin. Not a single grain can be found here. What's that in the soup? It's grass. Fucking grass. Besides, the guy had to cook for himself. He was born into a noble family, and yet he's never seen luxury in his life. Shouldn't noblemen live a rich and refined life, living in a beautiful mansion, enjoying a juicy steak every night, and having dinner parties in the moonlight in the evenings? How he would love to live a life of luxury and wealth. And then he thought of the people of his lands above all else. They were in big trouble. The only people living here are the exiles from their homelands, the sick, the half-humans, and the renegades. There's nothing but trash here, except for him. The one who was supposed to run this shithole was an alcoholic like his parents and drank himself to death. He thought about how his father had escaped from all this, and yesterday he received a letter. Ree of Babylon has been appointed Chief Lord of Babylon Territory. Damn, who'd have thought he'd become Lord so quickly? His elders could use attack magic, so no one could do any harm. And he has nothing but healing magic. Here he thought with horror that this simply couldn't happen. After all, nobles can use both battle magic and recovery magic. Stop messing with him like this. At this rate, he would be killed by a couple of bandits for fun. What should he do now? He thought about how bad he felt, and nothing came to mind. Suddenly someone broke down the doors right behind him, and someone said to him, "You're a lord, aren't you?" How tired he was of bowing down to their nobleman's tyranny. A face appeared from the cleft of the house and shouted to him that this land was now his. In front of him stood a heap of terrible people. Beaten, sick, mad. It was too late. Normally nobles can use attack magic, so no matter how trash they were, they had to run away. And then some old pumped up man yelled out that now the new lord doesn't have magic at all. Right. The guy thought he'd been exposed. He thought it was bad and that they really wanted to kill him. What should he do? Would they forgive him if he fell to his knees and started licking their shoes? Inside he was panicking, but on the outside his gaze was cold. The guy in the wounds got angry and said he was a bastard. In fact, he is something to something, because he doesn't lose his cool even in such a situation. He thought, what's wrong with this guy? Did the information about him not having any magic turn out to be a lie? And all the guy could think about was that it wasn't true, and that his facial muscles were going numb because of his fearful nature. That made the guy even angrier, thinking that he wanted to seem cool in this situation. The armless man shouted at him that they bastards were the reason he'd lost his arm. He yelled that he was a gardener and they just cut off his arm for fun. When the hero tried to hit him, the guy decided to use his magic. Then a flash of light blinded everyone, including the attacker. He covered his face with his palm and everyone realized that he used magic. Instantly, the attacker's arm became covered in bone and flesh. In the end, the hero's magic grew the enemy's arm anew. He thought what an idiot he was, used healing magic directly on the enemy. Then someone grabbed his arm. In his head, he was already thinking about begging for mercy, but it turned out to be the same man thanking him for his hand. The guy was perplexed. Everyone was confused, and thought about how a nobleman used healing magic on a commoner. What was even going on? They had never heard of healing magic being able to restore limbs. Is he really an incredible guy? The hero thought about the fact that he only healed a couple scratches, but now it might all burn out. He falsely leaned over to the man, put his hand on his shoulder, and said it was all good now, for he was their lord. He looked at the others behind him. This is a parade of cripples. Mr. Ree shouted that it was great, and it was time to cure them all. People couldn't believe it. Their eyes could see again. Everyone was well, and thanked the Lord, and called him Mr. Reese. The same man thought about what he knew. This would seem like a turning point for him. That's great. After all, among the inhabitants, most of them are sick and wounded. If he heals them, he'll make them his allies, right? That's right. Even if he can't rule properly, even if he can't fight, he had another option. With healing magic, he would be able to make people love him and he would stay alive. In his head, he was just cheering, because he would succeed. And then he would eat steaks until he died. For his own sake, he must please the people of the lands. This is it, the rise of the Lord of the Lowly Lands. A few days later, a girl dressed in monk's robes approached the settlement. She thought, so this is where the new lord lives, using his magic on the commoners. A nobleman that wastes his magic on commoners. She should properly look into this. The border of the kingdom of Frontier, the barony of Babylon. People call it the worst place in the world. It's where the wounded and sick who have nowhere else to go gather. And that's about to change. The guy pointed his hand at the remaining 2 sick people. They suddenly glowed. The girl was cured of her illness and the man began to see again. The unrivaled magic of a lord. They shouted to him, "Thank you very much," and called their lord Baron Reese Babylon. He has a caring heart. On the outside he looked embarrassed and said he didn't need thanks, it's small things. After all, he's trying for the people. On the inside, he knew he was just protecting himself. He's going to win their favor by securing his own safety and manpower by doing so. He thought about how wonderful it would be to walk around the city, like the most ordinary person, as someone called out to him from behind. The man came up to him tiredly and said they were almost done with the canal. But Reese interrupted him and told him not to say another word. Pointing his hand at him made him feel awake again. The fatigue spell. He's so full of strength and energy. Effects of relieving fatigue and lifting his spirits. He thanked him, saying he could go back to work again. Here the guy thought, so this is how his healing magic could be used. Besides, he had a feeling that after the spell, the man had turned into a real macho man. Be that as it may, now only a few days of work was needed instead of months. With the best case scenario for him, everyone would work hard and provide him with a luxurious life. Behind him, someone asked him if he was Mr. Reese Babylon. Turning around, he saw a nun with lush breasts that could be seen through the slit of her dress. As well as her lush hips, Reese thought about how huge her breasts were. The girl apologized for the late greeting and introduced herself as Alicia. She would like to ask my lord a question. He smiled and said that perhaps he could answer. She answered him that she was grateful and approached him abruptly. Maximizing the distance, Alicia looked appraisingly into the eyes of the surprised lad. Here she blurted out that in Sophism, the national religion of the Noja Empire, magic is considered a power granted by God exclusively for nobles. Thus, the use of magic for the sake of the vile nobility is simply outrageous. Is that how it is? There are no churches in his territory at all. He forgot about that. She pointed her finger at him and said that he still uses magic on the commoners. My mind started thinking, is he screwing up? Is it condemnable? And then she said, that's just great. He questioned her again about what she said. The girl replied that Sophism was a fake religion created by royalty and aristocrats long ago to make themselves special. But demiurgism is not like that at all. They consider magic as a power to save and guide the commoners. Here the guy asked, aren't they pagans? Here he thought about the fact that so many things are condemned by the state religion. No matter how you look at it all, now he's a target for reprisal. In other words, Alicia grabbed him by the shoulders and asked him as a gentleman that he was the personification of their faith. She urged him to convert to demiurgism. Exactly, so that's it. They need his bras, using magic for the sake of the commoners, to gain their trust. But he couldn't allow that, and wanted to refuse somehow. He didn't want to be hurt by the reprisals at all. Reluctantly, trying to remove her hands from his shoulders, he said that apparently there had been a misunderstanding. The nun said that it was all right, and that now he could show himself, for they had about 100 followers already. He was surprised, hundreds. Then he changed his mind, quickly took her hands and assured her that he was incredibly impressed by the teachings of demiurgism, and to be sure to let him join them and take the lowest position in the hierarchy. Blushing, Alicia was shocked. She exclaimed that this was a great solution. She would even give him a place at the top of their pyramid. It was too scary to refuse now, lest it cause a rebellion. Reese replied how he would like to keep them somewhere isolated if he could. Reese exclaimed that he knows. There is an old house of worship on the edge of town that is fashionable to use as a church. Alicia was so shocked that tears came to her eyes. She told him he was so kind. He was so generous to them, even though they were parasites in the eyes of the nobility. She said he was the Messiah sent by the demiurge, their chosen one. And would he let lowly Alicia devote her life to him? To himself he exhaled, and thought, now they are successfully isolated. In his head, he exulted that all was well. He doesn't think any of the nobles will show up here. This way no one would know he was harboring a bunch of heretics, right? Alicia called out to the people on all sides to come out and greet their messiah. Suddenly a bunch of hooded human images showed up out of the woods and bushes. The hooded men bowed to the nun and shouted as Bishop Alicia would order them. And then Rhys thought, so she is their leader. Alicia turned to the guy and told him to take care of them, calling him Mr. Rhys. The border of the kingdom of Noja, the barony of Babylon. People call it the worst place in the world. But life is bustling here, children play with each other and people go about their business. Everyone is happy and healthy. With a smile, Rhys looked at the city. They've gotten a lot of them, yes. Oh, those followers of demiurgism, he thought as he watched the girl perform in public. Alicia said that in this way, Rhys using his magic for the sake of them commoners is a true nobleman. The rest of the nobles and royalty are just dirty and vile bags of trash. The people supported her. In his mind, he was thinking, what the hell is that blonde nun doing? No matter how popular she is, the commoners of this land, there are just too many of them. And thought about the fact that there are already over 3,000 people. Even that house for a mansion on the edge of town. When the hell did it become a full-fledged church? If they have that much time, they'd better spend it tilling the land. Well, that might turn out to be a sort of plus too. They consider him their messiah, so doesn't that mean he can use them for his own benefit? Would consider it a gathering of allies. He's been summoned. No, an Afro-Hooligan, and he too. He had a demiurgism badge on his chest. Speaking of which, he had become much stronger. But then, that's already overkill for masculinity, isn't it? Gross, Rhys thought. Toph said that all thanks to his spell that relieved fatigue, he could push his body to the limit, and his muscles instantly healed. Also, much more importantly, he turned to the Lord and said that they had a little problem, and asked if he could walk with him to the outskirts of town. A large group of beastmen are illegally occupying the forest. The Afro guy confirmed, and said that among them, many came from the beastmen country that had been destroyed by their country a few years ago. It seemed to him that the captives had become slaves. In short, this group of escaped slaves were criminals. In his thoughts, Rhys was almost crying, thinking that he didn't want to mess with them. But he couldn't ignore them either, it would be even scarier. Here the Afro guy asked the assistant how it was going, and he replied that it feels like they just occupied the forest and watched their actions. Meanwhile, many eyes peered out from the darkness of the forest. Rhys noted that he felt an intense bloodlust. This despite the fact that there were mostly old men, women, and children. The Afro guy didn't think there were any good fighters there, and wondered if he should chase them away. Rhys smirked, and said they were no different from them, and that they would just talk to them. So starting a guerrilla war with beastmen whose physical skills are superior to ours is nonsense. Afro guy smiled. Rhys thought to himself, with such a large number of people, there must be one or two sick or wounded among them. If he uses healing magic. He admired himself and thought about how clever he was. He shouted into the forest and introduced himself as the Lord of the Barony of Babylon, and that he demanded to speak to their representative. Just then, an arrow landed at his foot. The men backed Rhys up and said, "Those bastards." Suddenly, a busty girl with ears, holding a bow, came out and told the man to shut up. The guy was surprised and asked himself, so is this their girl leader? So erotic. She asked angrily that the man wanted to talk to them but was only looking for an opportunity to trick them. Rhys yelled to her that he didn't want to fight them but just wanted to help the wounded. The girl held her bow at the ready and smirked. The nobility of this country decided to help them, the filthy beastmen. She aimed the bow at the guy and shouted that he was lying and not blushing. An arrow flew out. The boy was startled when he saw the arrow rapidly approaching him. Before Rhys could do anything, the arrow was caught right in front of his face by the Afro guy. Rhys mentally thanked the guy and wondered if the dog-eared girl was too intemperate. That's when the elder turned to her and said it was okay and they had nothing more to lose. Afro guy got angry. With his bare hand he broke the arrow in half. He asked how dare they do such a thing twice. Towards the magnanimous gossipton Riza. He and the rest of the men shouted that they would make them regret their rudeness towards Mr. Rhys. The same men shouted that they were miserable men, and that they would take their lands for themselves. Then someone shouted at them all, so loudly that it made them stop. It was Mrs. Alicia. The Afro guy was happy to see her, and the girl with the ears called her a priestess of Sophism. Rhys thought things had gotten even weirder. Alicia shouted that they were devout followers of the demiurge, the true god, and demanded not to mix it with a religion convenient only to the ruling class, saying that she realized that they could not trust the vicious aristocracy of this country. But their messiah, Mr. Rhys, is perfect, and that he would surely bring them salvation. So she asked if they could not believe in him. At the direction of the priestess, the girl with the ears said she would try to gather the sick and wounded, and told them not to even think of doing anything strange. Ree only smirked, and thought to himself, is there anything he can do in a situation like this? Pitifully, the girl with the ears held up the child, and asked to start with that child. Ree said there was no need to do anything special and raised his hand. The wounded girl in Irina's arms began to breathe in relief, as if a stone had fallen from her chest. Everything began to glow and people began to recover. Their tails were no longer ragged and their arms were healed. Their bodies were glowing. Ree stopped a girl with ears that wanted to approach them. Then Alicia jumped on him, clutching him to her chest. She told him he was gorgeous, which was to be expected. Reese was glad that his magic was stronger. After all, he healed people every day. The girl with the ears couldn't believe that the nobleman had just used his power to heal people like them. The same smirked and thought it was worth pushing a little more, and said that he wasn't done yet. This would not solve their main problem. He invited them to become his subjects and live on their land. Irina couldn't believe her ears and stared at the guy in surprise. Suddenly, a wild, large lion fell at their feet, and the lad said that they had many of them, and that they might not be deterred. His plan is to subdue the beastmen with meat obtained by his subjects. Monster meat is very hard to eat and smells bad, and is almost inedible to humans, but the beastmen are much stronger than humans and can eat it. They are even willing to eat it raw, and if somehow they get an upset stomach, it will cure them again. Be that as it may, won't that make them even more indebted to him? And it will save them from the morass of disposing of monster corpses, so they can kill two birds with one blow. Did it make her incredibly angry? But then the girl looked up, and she was happy, and thanked for the food. Reese was a little surprised. The girl was surprised to give them such a gift as if it meant nothing, and recognized that he was a really nice guy. The one was perplexed, thinking, this, a delicacy. The old beastman said that for their people, it was the most delicious dish in the world. He was impressed at how well informed Reese was about it. But it was nothing more than a coincidence, and the guy was shocked that they could eat such meat. With her mouth full, she apologized for her rudeness, and introduced herself as Irina, and said she would definitely repay him for the favor. Reese said that all in good time. The border of the kingdom of Noja, the barony of Babylon. People call this land a walking garbage dump. And these lands were about to change even more, taking in helpless people, heathens and criminals. Reese, filling out a pile of paperwork, roared. He couldn't take it anymore. How could the number of beastmen increase to several hundred in just a month? And the number of heathens is also increasing by leaps and bounds. Damn it all. This only makes his job more difficult. He'd like to hire people, but he can't afford to pay them. Then someone comes running in and opens the door. The wind blew all of Reese's papers around the office, and he had to gather them up in a hurry. Alicia worriedly ran in and said that she heard a strange voice from here, and did he need help? He just thought, what's wrong with him? And why is she running in here? She apologized for disturbing him. She must be thinking so much about Mr. Rise that she was having auditory hallucinations. Rise thought it was already scary. What the hell? She looked at him with loving eyes, and said that she could put everything aside for now, and that she needed to talk to him. Irina appeared at the window and asked if they were discussing business. Rise told her to come in through the front door, not like a monkey. Irina seemed so lively today. She ran up and high-fived Alicia, saying that not only her, but everyone else is in good shape thanks to the gentleman. She hugged Rise, and leaned her chest against his face, saying that the best thing is that he supplies them with a huge amount of water, and that he is a very good man. Rise smiled. He was pleased to hear and feel that. Alicia, blushing, approached them and turned to Irina that it would not be a good idea to disturb the gentleman with his work. She only said that she did not want to interfere with him. Rather, she would like to discuss with him something important concerning the security of the territory. Rise thought that it sounded troublesome already. Rise tried to turn his attention to Alicia and asked her if there was something she wanted to tell him. She was so excited. Yes, she said she would like to discuss education in their lands with him. And did she? Begging them to stop increasing his workload. Irina said that they were actually doing training exercises with the residents. A certain person shouted as hard as he could to be listened to, and that humans are just humans, not beastmen, and therefore lowly freaks. They are as useless as the monster shit they scrape, but after finishing this training, they will become soldiers of Babylon. And as a collective punishment, they were added 200 more, screaming, they better move their asses, for they must put their lives on the line for Mr. Rise and Her Highness Irina. All these thoughts were swirling around in Irina's head, thinking about how people are killed in training. Irina urged him to see it in person. It is truly beautiful. Alicia, on the other hand, said that she provides elementary education for children and she would love for Rise to take a look at it. The older woman turned to the children. Okay, next time they can ignore the labels. And if they want, they can attend church in their free time. Meanwhile, on the field, a man was coaching a child. At this rate, he wouldn't do Mr. Riza any good. Alicia imagined being approached by a bunch of children, saying that children are so cute and sincere. By the way, she is the kind of girl who wants to have as many children as possible. Both girls were persistent and asked Mr. Reese to stop by later. Thoughts flashed through the guy's mind. Did these two really have a crush on him? Perhaps he would get them into his bed. Smirking to himself, he thought to himself, there's no way he'll do that. On one side, he has a sister whose mind is tainted with paganism, with nothing good except big breasts. On the other side, a lecherous animal with dog ears, 90% of his thought process already occupied with food. And the only thing he liked about them was their looks, and he wasn't going to touch them. He thought about the fact that now was not the time to escape from reality. Each of them the leader of a larger group, so he needed to find an excuse to get away from them but not upset them. This was it. Reese apologized and said they would discuss things later. Alicia sighed, so it's just a farm inspection. Reese agreed and said that a steady supply of food is an urgent matter. Given the huge number of monsters in this land, Irina said that finding meat wouldn't be a problem. Rise said that so far so good, but they must consider the possibility of running out of hunting resources, and that they are only happy to eat everything. Rise said that in his territories cattle are dying quickly from disease and that he will look into it. The two girls came to a rapt attention. Alicia thought to herself that this is how he is going to use magic, the use of exquisite divine magic on livestock, the greatest taboo in Sophiism. Mr. Rise is so magnificent. Irina, on the other hand, thought about the fact that there would be more videos of various meats this way. Not bad. Rise said it's time to move on and both agreed with the master. They reached the village where they were met by a small sick calf. The old man stood beside it and turned to Rise and said that he did not expect him to come here. Rise replied that it was a request of his people, which he could not ignore, and turned to the calf. Leaning against the animal, a glow arose, and the calf rose to its feet. The girls glowed with delight. Before their eyes, the animal began to jump for joy. The hero discovered that healing magic can only help with diseases, but the calf is still small enough to eat. Then he thought about what if he cut off the necessary amount of meat without letting the cow die, then help it recover. He thought that this was too monstrous, and was there any other way to get more meat? The calf came up to Irina and poked at her chest. Reese thought of something. He asked if they had any meat. It needs to be as fresh as possible and told him to bring it to him right away. The girls looked surprised at the plate of meat that was brought to the guy. They wondered what he would do with it. The boy turned to magic. Ree, healing magic. All for a bountiful table. Something started to happen. The cells of meat began to turn into embryos, and then the unthinkable happened. Cows appeared right on the table. Everyone was shocked. What the hell? Rise was distraught with himself, for he thought what healing magic could do. There are no good books in his house, so he had no idea. This way he could eat as much meat as he wanted. Alicia exclaimed how great that was. She shouted to him that he was the best and that he had succeeded in creating life. Now all that was left to do was to accept the challenge of creating new life. Anyway, Rise said that this would improve his territorial food situation. More than that, they would be able to make money. Everything is excellent, and now he thought that he should hire people like beautiful and normal girls. He leaned over and hugged the cows, calling them little assholes. A month later, in the middle of the fields and mountains, a horse-drawn carriage was driving. Inside sat children who were covered with wounds. The child sitting there pronounced, "This is the end, isn't it? The border of the kingdom of Noja, the barony of Babylon. People call this place the cesspool of the kingdom. This is where the wagon was headed." Inside the wagon sat those very sick children. Sick and different children, from ordinary humans to beastmen, were coughing and bandaged. One of the girls didn't want to accept reality and didn't understand why things were like this. Of all places, it was to Babylon's domain that they were sold. Wasn't their lord a homicidal maniac? Nicknamed the meat grinder, the girl panicked and screamed, "Please no. At least give her a chance to die clean." The beastman retorted that as far as she had heard, he had been replaced. But wouldn't his heir be just like him? Perhaps even more reckless. Then one girl laughed as if out of temper and said that it seems that the goddess Sophia doesn't really love them. Having hit rock bottom, turned into sick and wounded slaves, they end up being sent to Babylon. Beastman asked, why don't they just bite off their tongues and die? That way they would be able to fight back one last time against these nobles, they thought. Everyone fell silent. One of the girls looked intently at the others. Suddenly there was a shout at them. They were told that the lands had already appeared. They were terrified. The children didn't even want to think what would happen to them next. Then they saw fields full of big gorgeous roses, and people smiling in the sunshine busily planting them. In the fields grazed well-groomed cattle and piglets. The fields were strewn with wheat. With glee they asked, "What is this?" The carriage had already arrived at its destination and the door opened. They were greeted by workers who told them they had arrived in Babylon. Welcome, shocked, all in wounds, the girls began to cautiously step outside. The Afro-bandit cried, asking if Mr. Rise had promised to shelter them. They must have had a hard time. The second man replied that this proved once again that the goddess Sophia was just a piece of worthless trash, and how happy he was to dedicate his life to demiurgism, and said since he was now protecting them, they were safe now. Beastmen asked what it all meant. Another girl asked, "Is this really the infernal lands of Babylon?" Someone came up and said not to scare the girls. It turned out to be Mr. Rise, who came to say hello to them. The guy was shining with his smile. One girl blushed as she was embarrassed by his good looks, and the workers apologized to him. He introduced himself as the local Lord Rise Babylon, said that they had to suffer a lot before coming to them, and thought that when he healed them, he would have a loyal workforce. A flawless plan. They stood in shock, looking at him and asking how is it that a lord addresses them. To the slaves, "Is he a lord? Are they joking?" A nobleman directly addressed the slaves. He only replied that they had nothing to worry about, and pulled the glove on his hand tighter and asked to be allowed to heal them. The girl asked him what he was going to do. Placing both hands in front of her, sparks of light sprinkled. The girls screamed, one's chest pain disappeared, another's hand obeyed again, a third's eye healed, and the fourth could just stand up. The girl turned to Rise, addressing him as my lord. She asked, despite being a nobleman, does he use his divine power on them, the pathetic slave girls? Rise smiled and with a wink told her that from now on, they will work as maids in his personal mansion, but they would need to recover first. Rise turned to Alicia, asking her to take care of them in the churches. The latter, pleased, said he could leave it up to her. Alicia approached the girls and happily said that now they could call her sis. The boys came up behind them and, smiling, declared how lucky they were, for they were now part of the Babylonian domain. The beastmen thought, how do humans get along with beastmen? Someone answered her, right. When she turned around, she saw Irina. She knelt down before her and said that now, thanks to Mr. Riza, they and humans live as equals. Furthermore, she asked her to stop with her highness. Irina apologized to her for all the troubles she had suffered because of her, but asked her to lend her power to Mr. Rise. The girl with tears in her eyes answered Irina that she was too kind to her, and that she would gladly give her life. Rise watched from the sidelines, thinking it was nice to see his vassals loving him more and more. Now that he could use healing magic to improve the growth of his crops, his lands were getting richer and richer. He even thought of himself as an incredibly talented lord. At this rate, if he continues to collect more and more girls, he can also flirt with them. Creating a harem might as well stop being a dream. A few months had passed, and at least he thought so, it would be just as he wanted it to be. Laying his head on the table, Rise realized that he had been carried away, and he had brought too many slaves. He healed the girls, moving them to tears. The people of the barony marveled at him and praised him unceasingly for his work. But as it was, they had just run out of money, and as long as he had his healing magic, they could get as much provisions and wood as they wanted. After knocking on the door, Alicia came in and apologized to him. She turned to him saying that the first girl maid was ready to attend him, and invited her to come in. Uncertainly, she entered the study and introduced herself by the name of Belle. In a lush, beautiful dress, the well-groomed girl entered, and joyfully exclaimed that she would gladly serve him from the bottom of her heart. Rise thought that wasn't bad at all, but no lol, no touching. We can only look at it in a few years. And then he thought, speaking of which, wasn't she the younger sister of the first group? Oh, it seemed to him that she was going to bring an older girl. But Alicia smiled and said that this girl happened to come from a family of tradesmen. She had learned everything from reading, writing, and counting to etiquette and manners. Oh, and her loyalty to Mr. Riza is unparalleled. The girl smiled and said that in that case she looked forward to working with him. Her eyes burned with obsession as she called him Mr. Rise, their messiah. At Babylon Manor, a girl in maid's garb knocked on the door and asked Mr. Rise to come in. As she opened the doors, she apologized for the intrusion. Rise, almost crying in the shower, said that they were bankrupt. With healing magic, he could sort out the water supply problem, but no one is coming to buy anything, and Babylon's goods aren't exactly reputable. He said he didn't think anyone would want to consume them. Maybe we should raise taxes under the pretext of helping sick and injured slaves. No, they shouldn't. Let them work hard now. It's still the same Babylonian rabble. They'll probably finish him off. The girl said she brought him some apples, or is she disturbing him? He replied that it was alright and that he was just a little pensive about their cash flow. She apologized, and how could she have interfered with the gentleman's noble musings? Rise answered her not to worry, all this hard thinking made him crave something sweet. Besides, he had come to the noble conclusion that they needed to maintain the status quo. It's also called postponement. He took a fork and stabbed a slice of apple. After tasting it, he told her it was delicious. Rise asked her, they get them from Bonkle territory, right? Yes, they are famous all over the country. And then he thought, as far as he remembered, this girl had been sold just in those lands, and that he had made a bit of a mistake. He bowed to her and apologized for his rudeness. He did not want to be attacked in the middle of the night by a maid who was 24/7. She only asked him to raise his head and held out her hand. The girl said that it was indeed a painful experience, but thanks to it she met Mr. Rise. So she doesn't care that her family lost everything because of the competitor's false accusations, or that her parents died because of that heart attack, or that she was sold into slavery. Rise thought he'd absolutely blown up on a landmine. Damn apples. Wait a minute. He wondered, would he be able to copy those high-grade apples with his magic? The girl said it's quite possible. There's also first class and tea and fur. That's what he thought. If they don't sell them at a discount without mentioning Babylon, he'll make a lot of money. The people of Bonklai will be happy to know that they can buy a good product at a reasonable price. This will be a huge project and asked her to notify everyone involved. Belle approached him and he asked what is the matter. She asked if he was doing all of this for those who were sold on the Bonklai. He thought, the money is actually partially needed to pay them and he doesn't want to be shipped out for saving on salaries. He said that yes, he did, and that he was not at all like Lord Bonklai. She marveled, and said that was wonderful. It's just as Mrs. Alicia said. Sir, he is most fit to be king. King? That blonde sister, what is she talking about? If something like that comes out, they'll be suspected of treason. Rise thanked her for her appreciation, and asked her to be careful with her words. They are in a very important period at the moment, and he wouldn't want to be suspected of cheating. At this point everything was clear and Reese asked that everything be taken care of. That same afternoon at midnight there was a scheduled meeting at the church. The head maid of Lord Ree's mansion. Belle said that the gentleman said the following. At this point he would not want to be suspected of métier. Alicia replied, my goodness, Alicia was the founder of the Church of the Demiurge. Irina, the former princess of the destroyed beastmen kingdom, smiled. Alicia teased and said that she understood how things were. It's just as she thought. Irina agreed. Yes, after all Mr. Rise is thinking of eventually rebelling against the kingdom. Alicia blushingly replied that they already knew that. After all, he was completely against the way of thinking of most nobles from the beginning, who thought that magic should not be wasted on commoners. The first step, Irina replied, would be to copy the specializations of neighboring lands and destroy them economically. Belle told the girls, if you create a perfect copy at a reasonable price, the value of the original will definitely drop, and money would flow to the lands of Babylon. They would need their own man to organize the smuggling routes and provide insurance in case they wanted to be arrested. Alicia replied that their cult would take care of that. Let Irina continue her work on the Babylon army. Irina replied that she understood. Once they get outside currency, they will buy more slaves and increase their forces. Belle said that Mr. Rise is awesome. He may be so ruthless in his plans, but he is so kind to them, the slaves who are his property. And the plan itself was devised for them, those who hold a grudge against the Bonklai lands. Irina agreed, and said that that man treated them as equals, even though they were beastmen. How wonderful it would be if he became king. Speaking of which, are the maids doing well? Belle replied to Alicia that they are all willing to lay down their lives for Mr. Rise. But unfortunately, they couldn't win his favor. It's just that Mr. Rise is different from the rest of the lowly nobles. Alicia thought about the fact that she of course chooses those girls that Mr. Rise doesn't like by type. Eventually she will be the first partner. Alicia exclaimed that she was the one who would like to be Mr. Rise's partner. Irina touched her breasts, thinking with shock, is it really about them? Grasping Alicia's breasts with both hands she squeezed them. It's clear from the touch alone. She asked Miss Belle to help her. Irina said that they are actually big. I wonder, and how is Mr. Rise able to withstand such temptation? Speaking of which, Alicia was also curious. Abruptly, she lifted the cloth that hid Irina's crotch and her eyes shone. Wow, so she's not wearing underwear after all. What kind of sneaky way to seduce Mr. Rise? She almost cried out that beastmen don't wear underwear because of their tails. And she's not trying to seduce him. Belle yelled for them both to stop. Please, she asked them not to fight. They just grinned and said they were just being intimate. Irina thought it was a bit unfair that she was the only one not involved. She looked at them in confusion. What? No. The girls' screams came from the castle to the entire courtyard. 2 months later, barony of Boncle, kingdom of Noja, Lord Jakov Boncle. He was 45 years old. Hitting the table hard with his fist, he shouted, he wants to be told that there are a large number of copies on the market, and all look like the original. Isn't there a possibility that someone is trading from their own stock? Captain of the Boncle Guard, Klaus. He said it was impossible. No such thing has been discovered. Many well-known stores have been forced to close. Suddenly, he was struck by a heavy blow that sent him flying. What do you mean? When he hit him, the Lord shouted, how did he not see that before? Jakov ordered him to get his ass up and find the person responsible for creating all these fakes as soon as possible. Bowing to the Lord, the shabby servant replied that there were too many people selling them. It would take some time to find the source. The man took a swing at him, and how dare a commoner like him insult him? All his anger went into the blow next to the leg where the young man was sitting. Barely dodging, he got up and ran for the exit. And now they're struggling to get capital from the surrounding lands because of that dump Babylon next door. The Lord shouted. He had no idea who had set it all up, but rest assured he would find him. Border of the Kingdom of Noja, barony of Boncle. Despite its poor geographical location, neighboring Babylonian territory, the city prospered thanks to the excellent local goods, until the horrible copies started appearing. In the castle, someone called out to Klaus. When he answered, he went in and saw a man on the floor. He nervously asked, isn't that the slave trader? The Lord shouted, that's right. He thought it was very suspicious that it was his business that was flourishing for some reason. He was selling slaves to this Babylon in huge quantities. How did the godforsaken lands have so much money? He was sure it was stolen from his barony, and he was the one responsible for making all those copies. Klaus asked him to stop beating him up, because he would die that way. So what? The Lord was screaming his head off. He doesn't care how many of them, or how many lowly cattle die. Klaus exclaimed that there was no proof that it was this man. The Lord was furious. Proof, bastard. Is he trying to tell the Lord what to do? He shouted that he'd give him until sundown to find the culprits, or be hanged. Klaus ran out. Speaking of which, the Lord thought there was a rumor. The current head of Babylon is useless trash, unable to use attack magic. So there you go. He'll challenge him to a duel and finish him off. A worthless parody of a nobleman born of this vile land. And destroy this unholy Babylon, leaving no trace of it. Klaus heard all this outside the doors. When he came out, he sat down on a bench and thought he was finished, for he would not find the culprit before sunset. After all, he was the one who ran the smuggling operation. What should he do? Alicia came up behind him and asked him if he should go with them. Alicia asked him why he didn't want to ask for help. After all, he had helped her with the contraband. He replied that it was fun to watch the Jakovs lose their temper, even if the lands would be devastated as a result. He replied that it was okay. Now if the Jakov were driven out of the country, they would be happy if they could get a lord who cared for the poor. I see. So he can't abandon the weak Boncle inhabitants. After all, he is from the slums himself. Alicia stood up and told him, well, since that's the case, he should go to Ryazan. Let him see and feel the present Babylon with his own eyes, and he won't regret it. The boy thought for a moment. In Babylon's domain he might indeed be better off. The girl with the ponytails turned to Mr. Riza, asking if he needed help. Bell replied that they would do anything for him. For whatever reason, the former slaves of the Boncle lands have been pining for him even more lately. He was approached at the door and told he had a visitor. Rise asked with a look at Bell, is it the captain of the Boncle domain guards? The one who helped them with the delivery of the spears. In Boncle, he was one of the few people who was kind to Bell. When she was imprisoned, he would secretly give her candy. Reese thought perhaps he was as cunning and secretive as he was. What could a man of such abilities possibly want with him? A guy jumped out of the closet and asked him to give him shelter. What? Wait. He said he wanted to see the city with his own eyes. He couldn't believe that everyone lived in harmony, overcoming the differences not only in status, but even in race. Kneeling before Rise, he said that Babylon had all the things he could only dream of. Rise put his hands on his shoulders and said he would leave it for later, for he was wounded. He asked permission to heal him. Rise raised his hand and a healing light appeared. Klaus looked at his wounds in shock. He jumped to his feet and thanked Mr. Rise, telling him that he was exactly as he had been told about him. Reese said not to worry about it, and thanked him for helping them with things at Boncle. On the other hand, Klaus told him that Jakov was the worst, and he considered all humans as cattle. Rise thought he understood why he had come to him. Klaus bowed and asked Rise to serve him and to give him orders. Rise said he should eat and rest, wasn't he tired? The boy cried at such kindness. He suddenly replied seriously that he had something to say. Mr. Rise must be careful. That bastard Jakov said something terrible. He's going to kill Rise in a duel and destroy Babylon. In his head to himself, Rise exploded, just what was missing. He wants to destroy the country he worked so hard to develop. He made his people smile by selling them copies of excellent quality at low prices. Also, a duel. Really, it's too dangerous to duel with a nobleman who can cast attack magic. What should he do? Klaus asked if everything was alright. Bell asked him to be quiet, and that the Lord was immersed in thought. Right now, the Master is using his divine intelligence to think things through several steps ahead. Rise turned to her and asked her to gather everyone, declaring an emergency. Also turning to Klaus to apologize, he said that his rest would have to wait. As Rise walked accompanied by the two girls, all the residents along the way greeted him, but he was serious and paid no attention to them. He turned to the people and asked them to listen to him. The barony of Bonclay had declared war on them. He thought about the fact that if it was too risky to fight himself, he would get his men involved. This is the decision he came to during his divine meditations. The people listened to him quite seriously. Rise continued his speech. Can they let the foolish and evil nobles take over their lands in which they have invested so much? And more importantly, do they want to put his life in danger? No. He told the people that this is war, and all those who can fight, let them take up arms. Alicia and Irina spoke. Here we go, finally. Irina said that what was to be expected from Mr. Rise, to think that he started to act as soon as Mr. Klaus fell. Alicia said, there's a reason she worked on Klaus. Irina was already thinking all sorts of things and blushed. Madam, is she really? Don't tell me. Alicia blushed and assured her that it wasn't what she thought, and she has already decided that her first will be only Mr. Rise. Irina smiled and said she was joking. More importantly, is she ready for war? No problem. The enemy guards are already under lock and key. As long as Klaus is on their side, they can do what they can to achieve their goal. It's time to take Mr. Rise and the demiurge cult to new heights. Let's go. Rise raised his fist upward, shouting that their battle is beginning. The Lord lay on the floor and tried to shield himself from the shouting outside. Mr. Zhukov was addressed by the people shouting for him to come out. How could he let this happen? Why didn't they catch the culprit? The people shouted that Mr. Zhukov was just a lowly lord. Because of these forgeries, now his shop is finished. People thought this economic crisis was all his fault. People were rioting. Why the hell do they pay taxes? Tot tried to shield himself from everyone, telling them to shut up and that it was all Rise Babylon's fault. That's the real culprit. Why are they blaming him? Why doesn't he just chase the cattle away with his magic? He can't do that, otherwise the nobles will brand him an incompetent butcher. Stones started flying through the windows, people shouting at him to get out. One of the stones hit him right in the head. He went berserk. Some dirty commoner hurt him. Zhakov touched the wound. Then everyone heard him shouting, to hell with it. He'll just finish them off, tear them all up. With a wave of his hands he ordered the Kanyas to rise up, creating golems. The ground crackled. Ugly and large golems emerged from the ground right in front of him. He ordered them to go on the attack, aiming at the people. Kill all those filthy commoners. The people started to scatter in panic. One of the golems grabbed the girl. Someone shouted at him that he was a rather evil lord. Zhakov shouted, who dare say that? As if from the dust appeared silhouettes of many people. People on foot and on horseback were rushing towards them. It was Rai's army, and with him were all his subjects. Rai shouted, sitting on his horse, his name is Rise Babylon, and he will protect these people. Rise thought, did they even arrive at an opportune moment? After all, he has no idea about the scheme of the church. Lord Zhakov interjected. Rise is talking. Why would he show up on his lands with an army that looks like vagabonds from the highway? He looked around and cursed. What the hell are the guards doing letting in such a crowd? He turned around and saw Klaus, who apologized and said they were taking matters into their own hands from now on, and that they had joined the territory of Babylon. People were shouting, great, everybody over here. They will escort them. The Lord became furious and incomprehensible. What's going on? The golems surrounded him while he denied it all. This just can't be happening. The economic crisis, the rebellion, the betrayal of the guards, it was all part of Rai's plan. Rise was surprised and thought, how could he think such a thing? And how dare he accuse him of such a thing? Alicia grinned, pathetic isn't it? Irina smiled, said that this is a punishment for disrespecting harmony with the people, that her people are the walls, and this is her castle. Rise asked, what the hell does that mean? Let her not bear such a thing, strutting around in a pervert's outfit. The Lord went into a rage, inexcusable. Absolutely. He will finish everyone off. He will wipe the territory of Babylon from the earth. Rise panicked, and to himself tried to calm himself that there were more of them. He thought that with his magic he could turn them into an eternal human wall. He turned to the people, listen up, everyone. He told them to stay close and don't panic, and to attack with ranged weapons. He would protect them. The Reese cavalry strode confidently forward. Alicia smiled evilly, kill Rise-san. Irina interjected with the same mean, destroy Babylon. As if not hearing Rise, everyone threw themselves at the enemy with shouts of crushing him. Rise was shocked. Die Jakov, shouted the warriors. Rise thought, what about the walls, where are they going? His men. He shouted after them, where are they going, you idiots? Who would protect him if he had any ace left up his sleeve? The Lord ordered his golems into battle. It's time for the decisive battle. The curtain rises. Rise thought of his subjects fighting bravely so that he wouldn't get into trouble. The Lord shouted to him, you bloody fool. These plebs are no match for his army. The Afro guy who was riding a horse at full speed collided with the golem and swung his sword shouting, get it. The humans fought the golems, striking them with swords. All those without throwing weapons had to drive their horses towards the golems and slow them down at all costs. People threw themselves at the golems with their bare hands, blocking their movements. The Lord stood shocked. What the hell is wrong with them? Are they not afraid of his golems? Rise covered his mouth with his hand, thought, how people fight like beasts, and it would be better not to anger them. Then one golem hit the man with all its might, and the man fell to the ground as if dead. When he got up, he scratched the back of his head. Jakov was frightened. Is he resurrected? Everyone shouted, great, Rise. And now to the left, there are many wounded. Magic that can heal a mortal wound. In an instant. That's impossible. Such power in the hands of some stupid aristocrat. The Lord thought it was unfair and became furious. The intelligence that stumped him, the ability to control a herd of bums as if they were his hands and feet, his incredible magical power. Raising his hands, he bellowed that he recognized him as his enemy. Raising his hands, he struck the ground, and creating a great crack in the earth, the Lord ordered the perfect golem to appear. Irina looked up in surprise at the direction of the silhouette. What is it? A huge golem appeared before them, and a smug lord stood on its shoulder. He shouted to the golem to destroy everyone, and pointed at Rise of Babylon. Without anyone noticing, the golem charged forward, sweeping away everything in its path. Everyone shouted to stop him. Some shouted that it was impossible and the golem is too agile. Rise looked at it and said that it wasn't fair and that they still had to stop it somehow. The Lord laughed, eyes falling out of his orbits, shouting that he had won. He shouted that he would crush Reese. Alicia tisked. Belle, sitting next to him on her horse, exclaimed that she was ready to die for him. He looked at the girls and thought now was not the time to move. They would be crushed. He tried to pull himself together, telling himself to pull himself together. Then he said he couldn't do it. He can't just give up and die. He has not yet achieved a truly luxurious life. The girls were inspired by his words. It was risky, but he saved something especially for the nobles. Rise asked to attack him and prepared to attack. Jakov looked and thought, what was his pouch? Could he interrupt the layout of the battle? And barked to the golem to protect it. The pouch flew upwards and the Lord tensed. It seemed to him that there was dust. The explosion in the sack hurt the golem's huge arm, which stood in place. The Lord assumed the dust was poisonous. Rise shouted that he would show him the miracle of life and waved his hand. The Lord looked puzzled as to what was going on. A whole herd of cows emerged from the dust and ran straight at the golem. The Lord looked at this and shouted, what? Creating life. This is not magic anymore, but some kind of miracle. A whole herd of cows ran through the golem's hand. Afterwards, all the cows were eaten by the townspeople. Everyone was ecstatic and Rise shouted, this is the power of justice. Justice that creates life with a selfish purpose. It's been a week since defeating the evil Lord Tyrant and Murderer. The essence of the cow explosion was sad. Enemy territory of Bonclay's domain. Reese herself. The girl screamed that she wanted to shake his hand. Their messiah. Someone asked for an autograph. People cheered as the Lord passed by. In his mind he was thinking about how hard it is to be a celebrity. Now the people who banded together because of Jacob's mismanagement have beef, and all those hurt by the riots are healed. But he mustn't let his guard down. Okay, now he's gonna say some quote for the history books. Jacob's lame management has torn the city's economy to shreds. Nevertheless, he's here for them. They need to try harder for their future. Reese was called out from behind him. Klaus got down on one knee and bowed, and said that they had rounded up all those who'd been clinging to Jacob's roundness. Reese assured that those would get what they deserved for their evil deeds. He walked over and patted Belle on the head, saying that they would arrest those who had imprisoned her parents, and that he and Klaus would take care of everything. Tears welled up in her eyes. Reese thought they'd done everything they could. All he had to do was formally appropriate the land. Irina interjected, Duke of Orenheim. Alicia confirmed, yes, he is the leader among the local nobles. They can't make this territory their own without his approval. Irina asked Alice, standing in Reese's room, is it all captured though? Isn't he one of those scum? Alicia said she didn't think there would be a problem. All because he, as they previously thought, was supposed to be their messiah. He's a fine nobleman without the gift of magic. But, because of that, he is not bound by the chains of false religion. He has never neglected the lives of the common people. On the contrary, he tried his best to improve the lives of the common people. Now it's clear who he is. Alicia said that she was sure he would be glad that these lands are now Reese's. Reese thought, who is she talking about? Is it that Duke? The absurdly great man? He panicked. How would he not knowing etiquette socialize with such a man? He wouldn't give him a death sentence for insulting his honor, would he? Well, he's not going to come here by himself anyway. A man called out from behind him and said the Duke of Hohenheim was here to see him. Duke Edmund laughed out loud. The man was 45 years old. He turned to Risa. So Jacob blamed you for his managerial failures and went after him. And when the man offered him peace, he forced him to fight because he started slaughtering his subjects. Rise confirmed and said he could not allow that. The guards of Bonclay's domain do believe that Reese is innocent, and he is respected among his subjects. Reese exulted in his head. What an understanding man he is after all. Yes, he's just a victim of Jacob's crazy, traitorous, murderous killer, as befits a sycophant like him, and truly a great man. Well, it's not like they didn't have problems. Edmund said he'd turn a blind eye to them and let Reese take the lands for himself, and he expected him to rule wisely. Reese stood up and bowed and smiled, saying he would rule at the cost of his life. Bonclay's territory is now his. The Duke of Hohenheim turned out to be a nice guy after all. He wished all nobles were like that. It was hell last time. The latter replied to Reese that it was a pleasure to talk to him. He said he could see in his eyes that he was polite to him as a man who was called a duke only by his lineage. Reese replied that he was more grateful to him, a servant of the people, than to a charlatan who knew nothing but magic. The man assured Reeves that these were bold words. In a society of magic supremacy, such things are best not voiced. Reeves asked if he would punish him for blabbing. The Duke stood up and said no, he valued his opinion. And just like he said, anyone who thinks his underlings are cattle will inevitably go down. All right, it's settled. He asked Reese to defend their country together. They will work hand in hand to keep peace in this land, even if sacrifices have to be made. The Lord thought, sacrifices. Edmund said it was time for him to go back. And if anything, he could turn to him and count on his help. He'd tear anyone apart for him. Reese was surprised. Really? Edmund, sitting in the carriage on the way back, said that this conversation was very important. When he heard about the report that he used magic to heal the common people, he couldn't believe his ears. But as it turned out, the trip was worth it. The prosperity of the commoners inevitably leads to the prosperity of the nobility. The current aristocracy, unable to recognize this simple idea, is no longer on the horse. He thought of Riza, and calling him an ally said that they would meet again, and that they would destroy all evil and bring peace on a bloody platter. A powerful man plotting a coup and a foolish lord gathering rebels around him. This duo comes on the scene out of the blue. The border of the kingdom of Noja, the barony of Babylon. Reese said they would help him with the administration of Bonclay's former territories. Across from him, bowing, the lad replied, at his noble's command, he offers him his assistance. Reese thought to himself that as expected of Uncle Hohenheim, it is healthy to have such holdings, but it is also more difficult to manage them. Besides, his new lands are quite extreme. The guy with the glasses said that Reese could have no doubts about him. Reese thanked him for his support, and said he should know that his barony is unusual in many ways. Toth replied to him that he shares the ideas of his nobility, which is why he's here. Reese smiled and said he was pleased to hear that. He's a peace-loving laborer like that, so they'll share the load together. Well, in that case, he wished him good luck in his work. He would notify the local office for cooperation. The guy with glasses responded by thanking him for his foresight. The outskirts of Babylon's domain, the beastmen settlement. As he said, they should visit these places from time to time. Reese walked into the forest. Pushing aside a bush, he called out to Irina and said he wanted to talk to her. A gruesome sight appeared before him. Plates and gnawed bones. A large cauldron where people covered in blood were cooking something. What the hell? Irina was cheering. Was it really Reese who had come to them? Reese wanted to turn around and leave and told her she was busy. She stopped him with a hand on his shoulder and told him it was okay. On the contrary, she wanted his opinion. Reese thought, would she at least wipe off the blood? That's creepy, she said about pondering the use of this thing she showed him. She had some kind of diamond in her hand. It's a magical stone, and she said it could be found inside a monster. Since ancient times, people have believed they contain magical powers. Maybe it can help Reese fight the evil nobles. Reese thought, are they all horny around here? This theory would be smashed at the first academic conference. In terms of the state religion, magic is a holy force that destroys evil. Still, there's a good chance Jacob wasn't the last bastard on his trail. Okay, putting on his gloves, he offers to pour some of his magic into him. He took the rock in his hands and tried to use the magic. Irina's eyes sparkled, but the hero said he hadn't done anything yet. Suddenly an explosion was heard and the stone shattered into pieces. The people at the cauldron didn't realize what happened and only shielded themselves from the smoke. Rhys asked, "Did it explode? How's Irina?" He called out to her. That's when Irina rushed to him, cradling her lush breasts in tears. Rhys immediately thought that was glorious. The old man apologized to Rhys for their inappropriate behavior, for their feelings are very sharp. Rhys replied that they shouldn't worry, he's glad it was all over. Irina blushed. She came to the conclusion that if you pour magic into a rock quickly, it will explode. An incredible discovery. Rhys replied, "Yeah, no nobleman would try it except for him. Stones can make weapons," he said, to work them further in that direction. Okay, now to Alicia. Honestly, he was a bit apprehensive. The church had gotten incredibly huge. Rhys didn't realize when it had managed to grow so big. He had a bad feeling. He heard some noises, and he wondered where they were coming from. Looking through the crack of the door, he saw Alicia. She was shouting to the believers to believe in the word of the Lord Demiurge, the Creator God. They must believe in his Messiah Rhys. The whole audience cheered. After calming down a bit, she said, "Okay, now sing their hymn. Rhys himself is their true savior. Walking the path of his faith is wonderful." To the shouts, to the scorchers of sinful aristocrats and the state, she showed her middle finger. Usurping power, how could they do such a thing? It was sheer chaos. She continued, "Long live Rhys Sama and their future child." Everyone cheered at every word. And as a gift for the newborn, they would bring the monarch's head. In a cold sweat, Rhys slowly and quietly closed the door. Walking back, he told himself that he had seen and heard nothing. Klaus called out to him from behind. He said he'd finished reviewing the guard patrol schedules and marshals, and asked for his approval. Rhys suddenly grabbed him by the shoulders and said he was so happy to see him. He asked not to call him by his official name, just Rhys. Klaus, embarrassed, said he couldn't do that. Rhys told him that he was an honest guy and that he was hungry and wanted to cook, inviting Klaus to join him. He exclaimed, "Rhys wants to cook. Won't he let him help?" At that moment, stepping quietly out of the room stood Belle, and eavesdropped on the guys. She thought about the fact that yesterday was not the last time. So why does her heart jump out of her chest every time Rhys herself is around other gentlemen? The border of the kingdom of Noja, the barony of Babylon. They call this place a treasure trove of oddities. However, things have recently changed. Things have become completely different. Rhys sat back in his chair and thought that everything had gone smoothly. And now that Bonclay's land was theirs, he paused and thought, why are the lands still called that? All of Jacob's kin had asked to keep the name. Pouring tea for Rhys, Belle said that Lady Alicia had talked to them and was satisfied with the outcome, so there was nothing to worry about. More and more people are arriving in these parts, understandably the kind of people. Rhys assured that there is no need to fear the lack of food, because with his magic he will help with the acceleration of production. Plus, it's a huge plus that Herzog Owenheim has his ass covered in case of trouble. Belle interjected, blushing. Covers what? Rhys asked what's wrong. Is she okay? She's so red. She quickly replied that she was fine, taking the tray and flew off saying she had a lot to do. The guy was puzzled and thought, does he smell bad? He relaxed a little and stretched. Thanks to the Duke he had a free moment. Actually, he has too many free minutes. What should he do? Exactly. His eyes are sunburned. Let's go on an adventure. When he was a kid, he used to read picture books. They say there's a dragon in an abandoned mine nearby. It's decided. He will gather a team of heroes and together they will slay this dragon. A life example of carelessness. He shouted, someone get someone to contact Alicia and company. Alicia was all glowing. He's inviting her to fight a dragon. Rhys smiled. Yes, he thought they could make an elite team. She screamed to be signed up. Now they would rush to her bed. Rhys tiredly said they were going to an abandoned mine. Just then she put her finger to Rhys's lips and started flirting. Come on, her mine hasn't been visited by anyone yet. Rhys darkened. What the hell is she talking about? Someone exclaimed that he heard everything. It turned out to be Irina, who was sitting in front of the building on a tree branch. Rhys asked her why she couldn't just walk through the door. Irina said that if they were going to the dragon, let them take her with them. For their beastmen, it's a real delicacy. Every year, a lot of people die for dragon meat. Rhys thought, dragons are so strong. Rhys asked, clearly, what does it taste like? Irina licked her lips and said it tasted like delicious chicken. Rhys replied, so why not go and eat some delicious chicken? Beastmen are pretty good at self-extermination. She confirmed what he said and said it was true. Alicia was carrying all her own. She thought of something. Irina-san, let Rhys make her a girl herself and Alicia a boy. That way they can both be the mothers of his children. Maybe he should use healing magic on her head. Rhys told Irina that he already tried it. It didn't work. Well, that just leaves Klaus. Belle said that Klaus had already arrived. Klaus came out and bowed. They wanted to see him. When he heard that, he was surprised to kill a dragon. But why not call Belle instead, in addition to their harem team? Rhys knelt down and grabbed his hands and told him he needed him and he was the only one in his right mind. Belle got steamy and offered to help him as well. Rhys accepted. The whole team was on board. A mage with no attack magic. A priest with no healing. A tracker? Probably not. A sword-wielding warrior? No. Weight-bearer? Minimal. Rhys said in his mind they were doomed. Rhys was about to tell them what he was thinking. Irina interrupted him. They created an object to use the magic stone. Why doesn't he take a look while others are gathering? The outskirts of Babylon's territory. A settlement of beastmen. Irina asked for research, and the humans did an excellent job. This explosive is complete, thanks to the peerless Rhys Same. And here's the weapon it's for, the bomb. Doesn't even lose to attack magic. Irina said that for them not gifted with magic, this is an incredible invention. Rhys agreed. Irina and the rest of the beastmen will use a special thing. With this item, all of the beastmen's enemies and dragons are within their power. Irina smiled at him, but her smile seemed strange to the guy. Rhys said that in any case, they can and will do it. The dragons only had to wait for them. In a foreign territory uninvited, they tried to defeat a dragon for fun. To this end, Rhys and the others set out on their journey. The abandoned mine had turned into a dungeon, the abode of countless monsters. Along the way, the boys met their first enemies. Klaus swung around and hit a goblin. Take that. Belle, walking beside Rhys and lighting the way with her torch, asked if there was anything she could do to help. Rhys, meanwhile, thought that Klaus' swordsmanship had surpassed his expectations. Alicia and Irina, what about them? Alicia swung at the goblin in a leap. This is not how he imagined their team. One fighter, one assassin, one he stands aside. The goblin with the eye patch smiled and replied that it wasn't bad. Irina turned around and smiled at Rhys, saying that everything was fine and they had everything under control, and that they would go forward. Rhys nodded at them and thought, somehow too easy. Scouting for Alicia, Irina carrying the luggage and at the same time covering the rear. They had already met strong enemies, but he didn't have a scratch on him, so it was time to prove himself as well. Alicia turned to him and said that there is a fork in the road. One of the roads leads to the lair of the orcs. Irina rebelled. She said orcs. They're delicious. She would like to kill them. Klaus looked at her. They are stinky critters. Rhys said they have come this far. They should focus on the dragon and be ready to fight. Rhys told Irina he'd give her some pork on the way in, just to keep her quiet. And Alicia said she'd eat Rhys herself. Belle wanted to tell her that was too much. There was a noise. The main characters were interested and decided to check where it was coming from. They are acting strange. It doesn't look like a sacrifice. Is it really what they thought it was? For the first time in a long time, some fool wants to mess with him. It was a real dragon roar. Rhys tensed up. What is it? Belle said it was scary, and Klaus pointed down the path, assuring him that the sound was coming from there. He asked her to stay with him. Rhys replied that he was counting on him. They ran toward the sound. Rhys and the dragon met eyes. Rhys turned to him. Is that him? The evil dragon. The dragon looked at him and thought, young women. Looks like fresh flesh, a sacrifice after all. Then the dragon spoke. It was so nice of them to bring him food. Opening his mouth, he asked to be allowed to taste their fresh meat. Alicia smiled and replied, okay, first come first served. The dragon wondered if it was too little. What is it? Looks like a kind of appetizer. Opening his mouth, he swallowed a cube that exploded inside of him. At the explosion, gloating smirks appeared on the boys' faces. People shouted, so to him, let him eat it. The dragon went into a rage. It can't be. Is this really happening to him? The king of all living things. He flew up to them and said that from his flames, no one here would be left alive. Rhys asked him, so he's pretty calm? Huh, great. In his next life he'll be his pet. It's settled. Rhys waved his hand. The dragon said, he's trying to avoid his breath with poison. Fool, he's a dragon demon. He can't be poisoned. Rhys smirked and answered him that it's not poison. That what he swallowed recently was flour made from the bones and flesh of cows. Now I can see why that powder smelled so much like cows. Rhys smiled and told him he was already dead. The dragon asked him what he had done. The dragon began to swell up from the inside until it was hard to breathe. What's going on? The monster's cheeks as well as his belly kept getting fuller and fuller. It continued to swell until cows started coming out of its mouth. A moment and there was an explosion. The horse-drawn carriage was soon on its way back. They handled the dragon and the bombs worked just fine. Rhys got a pet by using magic on the remains of the dragon. The little dragon, lying on Alicia's lap, made a rasping noise. Rhys answered him, hush hush, maybe he wants beef. Baby animals are just adorable, aren't they? He doesn't like cow meat. He's so picky. Alicia smilingly coddled the dragon, asking him to call her mom and Reese dad. Come on, the little guy is something, right? Reese turned to Irina, asking her to snap back and say something. But Irina with her full belly couldn't hear anything anymore. Klaus sat next to Belle. Fighting to the death against a strong opponent had strengthened their bond. Reese thought stop. The dragon went down right away. Isn't he a freaking overgrown lizard? Looking at the little dragon, Reese had a thought. It was sad if the dragon was really so weak. Let it eat the damn meat already. The battle with the dragon lasted for 3 whole minutes. The barony of Babylon territory. A couple days after killing the dragon, Reese sat in reflection. Meanwhile, Alicia was babysitting a baby dragon. Sayador Toro-chan. Irina replied to her that if she gave it a name, it would be sad to eat it later. Alicia said there's no way she's eating it. Reese asked them to be quiet. Irina replied, okay. It was important for her to know what he was thinking right now. Reese looked at her breasts as she leaned over. Nothing of the sort. He was pondering about the future paths of the lands of Babylon. He thought his healing power endowed them with food, but they have no tourists at all. Considering the reputation of these lands, it's not surprising. But as long as there are no tourists, the situation won't change. Vicious circle. He tried to think of a way. Irina asked for permission to help him. How about a cultural exchange with their forest settlement? But they're making bombs there. What about a theology study course at their church? Alicia glowed. Really, that's very risky. Reese thought of a dragon farm to play with and then eat. Too bad there's no lake or ocean in their territory. If you go east, through the mountains, you can see the ocean. But the mountains are very steep and there are monsters there. Reese thought about the path. That should work. I got it. 2 weeks later, construction began. The construction of the tunnel through the mountains is well underway, isn't it? Klaus turned to Reese. Reese replied that yes, all thanks to the workers, and all thanks to his healing magic, which can heal wounds and fatigue, and explosives that can shatter even the hardest rock. Still, he was grateful to all those who selflessly helped the common cause. Reese was called and told there was a need for his help. Turning around, he got excited and asked for it to be given to him. He would help get rid of all the damage. He was surprised. Standing in front of him was the same Afro guy. He was just huge. What happened? He over-medicated him. The Afro guy said they were almost through digging in, so he needed some energy for the last spurt. Reese thought, he's not going to die, is he? Reese pronounced, the fatigue is leaving him. His muscles are tensing up. It's all in the chocolate now. The Afro guy felt the power surging through the edge. It was as if he had lost his mind. Reese didn't realize what had happened. What the fuck is going on here? The jock's silhouette began to slowly diminish. Suddenly, the guy was back to his original state, as if those muscles never existed. Reese asked if he was okay. He told him the weight was fine and went back to work. With one punch, he knocked down a piece of stone wall. Reese looked at him apprehensively. Did he create a monster? Someone called out to him again and Reese looked back. Other workers came up to him and said they wanted to do the same. Reese asked them to stop. Well, they were in for a surprise after all. Now they're at the shore. They've managed to make a tunnel to the ocean. Reese immediately thought that his Afro bandits could build a port, and that they would find a place for a dream resort. Alicia walked over to Reese, and taking his hand leaned her whole body against his. Maybe since they're at the beach, why don't they change into swimsuits? Irina grabbed her by the shoulders. You can't, Alicia. You can't go in the water without knowing the wade. You can't. Reese only thought about the fact that their revealing outfits already looked like bathing suits. Meanwhile, from the waves of the ocean, it was as if someone was watching. In order to build a resort to attract tourists, they drilled up the mountain and came close to the shore. There is a luxury resort on the other side of the shore on the Palisade property, and they need to wean potential customers away from there. Anyway, Reese had something to say and coughed. He told the others that they would work for fun. In his mind, Reese thought he was doing research, not having fun on the beach. Irina in her bathing suit brought a ball and offered to play. Klaus looked at it, a beach ball. Irina assured him it's okay. They checked the beach. It's safe. Klaus said they say there's a Kraken living here. Reese got worried. A Kraken. He forgot about the Kraken. Damn, this is not good for the resort. But if you think about it, they had already taken down the dragon, and that they could handle the Kraken if necessary. Why not? The guy told the boys that they would kill the Kraken. That's right, and his magic will allow him to give tiny Krakens from the meat of the big one. A resort beach where you can play with a tiny Kraken. Genius, the girls whispered amongst themselves. The Kraken must be the scourge of Palisade territory. They'll borrow it. And when they create a legion of Kraken, the regular fleet won't stand a chance. You have to make a lot of noise and play to summon a Kraken. Everyone was having fun. Alicia called Reese and offered him a swim. Or maybe they'll play beach ball. She just had 2 of those by her heart. Rhys blushed at such flirtations from the girl. In his mind he told himself to hold his horses. Her body is a tenor, but her head is a horror. His aura of common sense should inspire her to be normal, but until then, he wouldn't lay a finger on her. Irina exclaimed, "Rhys, beware." The hero froze in shock as the ball whizzed right by his nose with wild force and shattered the rock behind his back. Her body is also a 10, but she too must fall under the influence of his aura of sanity to become decent. Irina said that she wouldn't lose to Alicia, and that she would be Rhys's first. My god, the latter only smiled and said she didn't mind being in mistress status. She is her best friend after all. Rhys thought, should he be happy or afraid he's out of the loser zone? Klaus called out to Rhys and yelled that something was coming out of the ocean. Belle yelled for them to get out of the water now. Huge tentacles came out of the water. The tentacle aimed for Rhys, but Klaus managed to flip it away and fell to the ground. Rhys turned around and called out to Klaus. Before he knew it, the other girls were squealing. Irina and Alicia were grabbed by tentacles. It looked both frightening and mesmerizing at the same time. They were screaming how slimy it was. The tentacle was getting under their swimsuits and Irina was biting it. It's the Lord of the Sea himself, the Kraken. Rhys ordered the little dragon to go on the attack. Go, Lord of the Skies. But the little dragon was useless. The girls shouted to the hero and asked him to help them. Rhys thought it was a bad thing. He thought it was about the hat, but the Kraken turned out to be pretty strong. We should finish it off with bombs. But then the girls would get hit by the blast wave. That leaves only healing magic. At his feet he spotted a sea urchin, and he thought, that's it. Rhys turned to Klaus and Belle and asked them to prepare the bombs. Klaus said it was dangerous, he'd be alone. Rhys told them it would be okay, the ocean is full of life. He has healing magic, and he's not afraid to use it. He yelled for them to run away and waved the boys off. Kraken looked at Rhys as he waved his hand at him. The guy used his magic on the sea urchins and yelled for his enemy to choke. His magic is now able to breed creatures with simple anatomy. It's no longer healing magic. Sharp sea urchins pounced on the Kraken. Rhys rejoiced. It works. An algae breeding predator. The Kraken was greatly enraged by such a sudden attack. Rhys picked up the starfish. Assured that this was not all, he hurled it. The stars multiplied. The coral's natural enemies also multiplied rapidly. The girls felt the grip loosen and they got rid of the tentacles. And the jellyfish for an epic finish. Super sprawling planktonic annihilators. The Kraken was attacked from all sides. The girls ran up to Rhys, exclaiming that he had saved them. Well done. Klaus and Belle ran up behind them. Klaus was holding a cart with explosives. Rhys turned to everyone and said they would do it. They will protect the peaceful ocean life, and piles of explosive dice flew straight at the Kraken. There was a mighty explosion and the Kraken disappeared from sight. They did it. The world had returned to the ocean waters. There were tons of dead fish and starfish on the beach and in the water. Well, it wasn't without casualties, but that's okay. Rhys hoped for Mother Nature's resilience. 2 months later, Paleface territory. The girl got up from the table. What do you mean the fish population has drastically decreased? The old man stood in front of her with his head down. Well, a lot of strange information has been received. The girl shouted that he was of no use. The girl exclaimed, okay, she'll show them what the talented Lady Silica Paleside can do. The girl stood on a cliff that was washed by the ocean. She cursed the pirates who were never seen. The girl cried with hopelessness. Her name was Silica Paleside. The girl was from the county of the palace. She complained that not long ago she had bathed in luxury, but now she was starving. Someone called her by name. Frightened and fuming, the girl turned around. Standing a little farther away from her were men. One of them, who had called her by name, said his name was Rhys Babalon. The young man added that he was here to condemn the rascal Lady Paleside. He pointed his index finger at her. The girl continued to cry. Her hands were tied. The sun was descending towards the horizon. 2 days earlier, Rhys exhaled a sigh of relief. Klaus walked up to him and asked him if everything was okay. Rhys turned around and replied that Klaus was here too. Rhys looked out at the ocean. He continued that he was thinking about the Kraken. Klaus replied that it couldn't have been prevented because they couldn't have known it. Klaus stood up next to Rhys. Rhys agreed with him. He replied that he hadn't realized there was a giant Kraken. He paused in his speech. Rhys added that he hadn't realized that the giant Kraken was just a baby. Klaus said that he didn't know that babies could be over a meter tall. Rhys didn't know how such a big and scary creature could attract customers and eat all the fish in the ocean. He cried with despair. Rhys thought it was a good thing that he ordered the monster to swim away from the shore and only let it go. The young man had always dreamed of controlling life with magic. He was the worst in so many ways. Rhys said he'd be sure to think of more things for the tourists to do. He asked Klaus why he was here. Klaus was silent. Rhys asked him again. Rise asked himself that, was Klaus really going to rebel? He remembered that Klaus had betrayed Jacob once before, after all. He felt that he had to get back in his good graces somehow. Rise told Klaus that if he had something to say, there was no need to keep quiet. He added that he'd been listening intently. Rise mentally added that he didn't need to think about rebelling against him. Klaus grabbed Rise's hands. He turned to Rise in a loud voice. The young man was puzzled by what was happening. Klaus kneeled down in front of Rise. He lowered his head and said that he was very worried. Klaus asked if he had helped enough. He shouted that he was afraid that Rise might give up on him one day. Rise figured that, even considering the Kraken, he'd hardly been useful these past few days. Klaus added that Rise's Sama magic had saved the situation. Rise asked him that, in short, he liked him too much. The young man thought that was very awkward. Rise tried to stop Klaus' speech, but Klaus interrupted him. Rise said that to him, Klaus wasn't just a subordinate, but his friend. He continued that friends didn't have to be helpful. The young man asked Klaus if what he said was right. Klaus was touched by those words. Rise mentally asked him not to betray him. The young man was worried. A maid was watching them. Rise was also on his knees. The girl was embarrassed, but wrote down everything that happened in her notebook. Rise noticed her. The girl realized she was caught off guard, so she hurried away. Rise called out to her. Belle tried to justify that drawing had become a very popular hobby, so she decided to sketch. Rise replied that it was understandable to him. A special scene was promised at the end of the first volume. The bewildered girl said that Alicia herself had been waiting for Rise at the harbor. Rise asked that she was already waiting for him. He added that he was already on his way to the harbor. Rise called out for Klaus. Klaus replied that he would escort him out. Belle lagged behind them. She was writing something in her notebook again. They headed to the port of Babylon, which was under construction. Alicia called out to Rise. She waved to him. The girl was happy to see Rise. She walked over and grabbed his hand. Alicia said that she had been waiting for him. She continued that they needed to talk, so they needed to go get pebbles. Rise interrupted her. He asked what was going on here and what all the fuss was about. Rise thought as she touched his hand with her form. He was very happy about this turn of events. Irina's voice was heard. She said that Rise don't come too. They turned around. Irina pointed to the ship. She added that they needed to look over there. Rise asked what was up there. Irina replied that they were sailing under a black flag with a skull and bones on it. The girl added that it looked like they were pirates. Rise was frightened. He thought that things were finally starting to get better, and here came the pirates. He stopped himself with the thought that half the population of his lands were criminals, and it was too late to be scared. Everyone looked toward the ship. Irina flexed her fingers into the shape of binoculars and watched. She wondered. The girl said there was just a small boat. Rise looked closely too. He said they were yelling something. The young man concluded that it looked like they were in trouble. Klaus replied that it could have been a trap. He asked Rise to be more careful. Rise thought that it was possible to get these pirates on his side. He said that they should have listened to them first after all. The young man added that they could have had an epidemic or something. Rise continued that being a Babylon meant that one had to help those in need regardless of race, position, appearance, or circumstance. His subordinates admired him. The pirates reached the shore. One of them asked if they could help them. The pirate explained that they were transporting slaves and they seemed to have a plague. He continued that they didn't want to get their hands dirty, so Rise needed to do the dirty work for them. The man added that they were even willing to pay. The subordinates were furious. One of Rise's subordinates shouted that they should have been finished off. The others rushed after him. Rise thought that this pirate had hit a nerve. He realized that these pirates now had many healthy slaves. The subordinates ran through the water toward the pirate's boat. The pirate could not believe his eyes that they were running on water. One of the subordinates slapped the pirate on the cheek. He flew backwards from the force of the blow. The subordinate was furious. Very quickly the rest of the subordinates reached the pirate's large ship. They jumped aboard the ship. The rest of the pirates were on that ship. One of the pirates asked them who they were. He added that they had just flown. The pirate was interrupted by the captain. He instructed his pirates not to manhandle. The captain added that it didn't matter if they could fly or not. He pulled out his saber. The captain added that he just had to deliver the killing blows to these uninvited guests, and then they would all surely die. He attacked one, but the saber broke in half instead of wounding him. The captain went into a stupor. The other pirates were also puzzled. The subordinates smiled broadly. One of them began to warm up his fists for an attack. The prisoners of these pirates were in a terrible state. They were thanking their rescuers. One of the rescued said that Rise not only saved them from the pirates, but also healed them with his magic. Rise's hand was held out in front of him to use the magic. He smiled. Finished. Rise replied that it was all a trifle. He asked the captives how they ended up in captivity in the first place. One of them began to say that they were all fishermen from different fishing villages, and when they went to sea they were attacked by pirates. Another added that the drunken pirates said they were to be ransomed by Lady Palicide. Verena said that kidnapping and enslaving innocent fishermen was an unforgivable act. Klaus replied that it wasn't the same as a delinquent slave or a debtor slave. Rise said that it was clear to him that the fishing profession was a rather difficult endeavor. He continued that if he did not return home, they would surely be presumed dead. The hero crossed his arms over his chest. This was definitely a crime, he thought. Rise realized that this was the perfect opportunity to catch a glimpse of Babylon Beach competitor Sokka Palicide. He smiled evasively. Rise remembered that Palicide owned a famous resort, and it was very close to Babylon Beach. He kept thinking of ways to steal customers from them. Rise thought that now he had dirt on them. He laughed out loud. Rise didn't know what kind of magic Palicide possessed. He didn't care because he was just going to use his men as usual. Rise turned to the rescued men. He asked if it was okay for them to just sit there and suffer. The fishermen began to cry. One of them said that it didn't matter if they had anything to say, the nobles didn't care about them. Rise asked that they had forgotten about his existence. He added that they should have let him absorb their rage and sadness. The hero spoke very enthusiastically. The team of friends started to look over to each other. They were ready to help Rise. Rise said that it was settled and they were going to the Palicide. On the grounds of Palicide, at the mistress' estate. Mistress had her head down on the table and was crying. The servant stood in front. The mistress said that in addition to the catching problem, there had been a lot of damage to the reef, and that was the main attraction. She added that there were also all these other incidents in the surrounding waters. The hostess clutched her head. The servant was wiping the sweat from her face with a handkerchief. The servant replied that they had figured out the cause of each one. He was interrupted by the mistress. She said that she knew about all this. The girl added that she even stipulated to the pirates to take care of the problem. The mistress said that the pirates never came back and the locals were completely useless. The servant replied that the local government representative wanted to contact her. The mistress said that this meeting would not take place because the representative was only going to whine anyway. She ordered the servant to tell the representative that she was sick and had been in bed all day. The mistress was on top of a cliff that was washed by the ocean. She asked why this was happening on her time. She was to meet Rise Babylon soon. Someone said that the Kraken was a monster lurking in the depths of the waters of Palicide. The person added that they'd rigged the ship's routes and all that, but still, the landlady was crying. She said that all of a sudden a bunch of his cubs had popped up out of nowhere. She went on to say that because of the cubs, their tourism and fishing industry was in ruins. The girl added that the incompetent feudal lords demanded that she deal with everything herself. The mistress said that she was certainly quite resourceful, but the only idea that came to her mind was to dangle a bait victim from the ship and take the Kraken far away. The mistress had even arranged a sacrifice with the pirates. She didn't want to get herself in trouble. The ship was traveling through the waves of the ocean. Someone asked what was there. Silica spotted the pirate ship. She was glad that they were back. The girl started shouting that she was on a rock. She waved at them. The mistress continued to wave to the ship. Rise asked what she was waving to that ship. He said it was definitely some aristocrat. Rise said she didn't know who was on that ship yet. He crossed his arms over his chest. Alicia stood next to him and smiled. Rise figured they had gathered evidence and they had witnesses. They had enough resources for a years-long legal battle. He figured this was the perfect opportunity to lure out a couple of handouts. Rise raised his hand and ordered that they had to go forward. He added that they were to bring the treacherous mistress to justice. Rise and the others stood next to Silica. Rise introduced himself. He said he had come to judge her. The girl was confused. Silica didn't understand what was going on. She remembered that Babylon was the deepest hole. She wondered to herself what her master was doing here. Rise thought that if she started to resist, he would turn her own men on her. The hero mentally laughed similarly to the villain. Silica thought that it looked like the pirates had blabbed everything. She tried to calm herself down. The girl thought that even if that was the case, she was still by the ocean, in her element. Silica thought she should have denied everything. She stood up. The girl said it didn't matter what his name was, he wouldn't be able to get in her way. A wave appeared. Everyone was surprised. Rise asked what it was. Silica asked them how they had such a thing. She said she was a gifted water mage. The girl asked Rise if he realized how powerful she was. Rise replied that the powers were impressive. Silica added that his men were in huge trouble. Rise didn't understand. All of his subordinates ran towards the shore. Someone shouted that there was a tsunami. Another shouted that they should have run. Irina asked Alicia that she was stupid. Alicia replied that all the nobles, with the exception of Rise and Hohenheim, were like that. Silica ordered them to be quiet. Silica said that it was a small demonstration. She was preparing for another attack. Huge blobs were flying behind her back. She started to attack. Klaus stepped forward. He told Rise that he had to get behind him. Silica stretched her arms forward and was about to attack. Klaus cut those drop darts. Another of the subordinates just covered Rise with his body. The drops didn't hurt him. Alicia and Belle started throwing daggers at these blobs. Some of the blobs were destroyed. One of the daggers almost reached Silica. She dodged, but a strand of her hair was cut off. Irina almost reached Silica. Irina was about to hit her. She screamed that she was caught. Irina prepared her fist for the punch. Silica intended to activate a defense spell. She cried. Silica screamed that they had to leave. A blob appeared around Irina's fist. Irina didn't realize what had happened. Irina did a somersault and stepped away from Silica. She was furious. Silica asked herself what was happening. She couldn't believe that a commoner couldn't be so resistant to magic. Rise didn't understand what was wrong with Silica. He thought she wasn't very smart, but she was strong enough. Rise and Silica looked at each other. Neither of them were going to give up. Rise thought that since this was the case, he would end it with magic. He prepared himself to use magic. Silica was silent and smirked. Silica screamed that she was giving up. The girl cried and begged for mercy. Rise fell into a stupor. He couldn't believe his ears. Silica was on her knees. All of him was looking at her. Rise started that since this was the case, he wanted to be blunt. Silica interrupted him. She asked what they needed. Silica thought that he was probably inexperienced, so they needed to get his teeth into it. Her musings were interrupted by Rise. He asked that she was the one who had instructed the pirates to kidnap the fishermen. The girl jumped back in surprise. She asked again. Silica was confused. She asked why the sacrificial fishermen were still alive. Rise replied that she was talking about the sacrificial fishermen. He shouted, asking that there was something so immoral in her plans. Silica was startled. Silica screamed that she had no choice and it was all the Kraken's fault. Rise mentally asked himself about the Krakens. Silica was crying. She continued that they were joined by a surge in the numbers of jellyfish, sea urchins, and starfish. The girl added that the ecosystem was coming to an end. The coral reefs had been destroyed. Rise thought he was in big trouble because this was entirely his fault. He looked at his friends. The hero figured that the others thought so too. At this time, Alicia thought that as expected of Risa Sama, and it was all in the name of Babe Allen Beach. Irina thought that Rise had managed to pin the opponent against the wall. Belle thought that Rise must have calculated Silica's every move. Klaus thought that was why Rise was breeding the Kraken. They were all overestimating Rise. Rise replied to Silica that it was clear to him now. He continued that Silica was protecting her people, not her personal interests. The girl was still on her knees. Silica nodded. She replied that it was like that, and it was all in the name of her great loyalty to the people. The girl added that she was willing to get her hands dirty for the sake of the people. Silica thought that everything said was not true. Rise turned to the fisherman. He said that was her point of view. The hero asked the fishermen what they thought about it. Rise realized that he was the one responsible for her troubles, and he felt bad for killing her. One of the fishermen replied that it didn't change the fact that she had been egregiously cruel, but she was understandable. Another added that if they had gotten a lot of money as compensation. Silica interrupted his thought. She said she was willing to pay them and pay it all off. Silica got excited. She turned the conversation to the Kraken problem. Rise walked over to Silica. He told her not to worry because he was going to solve this problem. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder. A few days later on the beach of Palicide, the water was clear. The ecosystem had been saved. People's normal lives continued. Silica was delighted. She said that this was what Risa Kun's power was like. The children noticed Risa. They shouted, greeting him. The people ran up to Risa and surrounded him. Someone thanked him for restoring the coral reefs. Another shouted that thanks to his healing magic, the fisheries were back in order. All of them praised Rise and his power. Someone in the crowd said that it was amazing because Rise really took care of the Kraken. Another replied that he tamed them and gave them away to the humans at no cost. A third added that Rise's Kraken races were a real hit. Silica tried to see Risa over the backs of the humans. Someone said that Lady Silica had done nothing to solve the problem. Another stopped him, saying that Silica had heard everything. It hurt the girl to hear all this. She clenched her fists. Silica ran away. She was crying. The girl shouted that she wanted to be popular too. The crowd paid no attention to that. Silica was in her office. She was sitting at her desk writing a letter. She said that it looked like it was time for exploits. The girl thought that she too could solve a couple of problems quickly and easily like Ray's Kun, and would be universally revered. Finished, she put the letter in an envelope and left the room. The man shouted, not believing what he heard, that Countess Silica Palisade had disappeared. The girl replied that Silica had left a letter asking her to entrust her lands to Rise Babylon. The man said he didn't like being neighbors with an unpredictable idiot, so he'd taken to haranguing her. He reflected. The servant asked if that was true. The man answered in the affirmative. He said he was sure he had everything going according to plan. He continued that it was leaving them. He was interrupted by the girl, saying that it was about Viccount Snail on the Django lands. The man replied that this Viscount was a specimen of rotten aristocracy. The man said that no doubt someone would have gotten in his way. He turned to Rise that he needed to show him how to handle it. Rise sneered. He wondered if the sea breeze had given him a cold. Rise was chipper as always. On the grounds of Babylon, in the master's estate, Rise was holding a letter in his hand. He said that the time had finally come. The hero went on to say that because of the bad reputation of the name Babylon, he had been completely undeservedly ignored by high society. But here was his first invitation to the party. Rise raised his hands. He shouted that it had finally come. Rise sat back down. He rubbed his chin. The hero thought that his efforts and exploits had not gone unnoticed after all. He was very pleased. An image of Silica surfaced in Rise's mind, saying that Rise Sama was worthy of ruling the lands of the Palisade in her place. He thought that he had received the lands of the repentant Lady Silica of Palisade. Rise thought that his holdings were now quite extensive. He asked himself if he was just as cool now. Bell knocked and entered. The girl said that Alicia Sama and company had come at his call. She added that the seamstress was here as well. Alicia turned to Rise. She said that she heard that he wanted to see her, so she came. Irina asked if any help was needed. Rise said that the point was that he had received an invitation to the party from Viccount Django Snail. He continued that the Viscount's property bordered his, and it was near the mines, the same ones where they had destroyed the dragon. Rise added that he wanted them, Alicia and Irina, to accompany him on his visit. The girls were enthusiastic. Alicia asked if she could consider it an offer. Irina added that she too was not averse to accompanying him during the visit. The girls walked up close to Rise. He tried to mentally convey to them not to get so close to him. Rise stopped them, telling them not to jump to conclusions because it was just for propriety. It was embarrassing for him. Rise figured they had their own cockroaches, but they were still pretty girls, so they would emphasize his influence perfectly. Rise turned to the seamstress. He said the seamstress' job was to make him a suit and the girls' ball gowns. The seamstress looked at his hands. He said that he had angered the royal family and they had cut off his fingers and banished him from the court. The seamstress added that he would make perfect suits for Risa Sama, who gave him back his fingers. Risa thought that was marvelous. He was really looking forward to this party. He realized that it was the perfect opportunity to show himself, Lord of the lands of Babylon, in all his glory. The hero thought it was a shame he didn't know anyone there. He realized that he could have asked the counselor. The invitation said that he could come with companions. In the evening of the same day, the young man said that everything was going according to the Duke's plans. Young asked that he knew that Django wanted to be friends with Rise Dono. Alicia replied that it was impressive insight. They sat at a round table. Alicia continued that Viccount Django Snail represented a typical bad man in power, so they had to get him out as soon as possible. Irina asked that there was sabotage planned for the party. The girl added, asking that even with her and Silica as guards, was Rise Dono safe in enemy territory. The young man replied that there was no need to panic. He continued that, as expected of his lord's chief ally, by accepting the invitation, Rise Dono had made the best decision possible. He adjusted his glasses. A month later, there was a party at Viccount Django Snail's estate. One of the nobles asked the others that the heir to Babylon was really going to appear at the ball. Another replied that he had accepted the invitation, but who knew, maybe he didn't have anything to go in. The woman standing next to him added that she was more interested in who he would bring with him. She continued that it was probably some ugly little lurker. Their conversation was interrupted by a man. He apologized. The man added that it was best not to look ahead. It was Viccount Django Snail. He was 30 years old. He asked the guests if they felt sorry for Risa Kun. One of them replied that the organizer of the feast himself had spoken to them. The woman thanked the Viscount for the opportunity to enjoy his presence. The Viscount continued that it was soon time for Risa Kun to appear at the feast. He added that they would show the poor man, who had not the slightest idea of the ways of high society, the prestige of true aristocracy. They raised their glasses. The doors opened and Rise walked in with Alicia and Irina. Everyone turned around. One of the men said it looked like they had already arrived at the ball. Rise asked that they were the very last ones to arrive. The Viscount became angry. He asked what it all meant. Everyone looked at the guests who had arrived. A woman asked that this was the heir to Babalin's holdings. The man with glasses thought they were very beautiful, but their outfits were so elaborate and unusual. Alicia made a bow and introduced herself. She said that she had accompanied Risa-sama to this party. The girl added that she was only a commoner, so it was an honor to meet everyone. Irina introduced herself and said that she had also come with Risa Dono. She added that no one but Risa Dono had the right to ogle her. One of the guests interjected that he had really brought a commoner and a beast woman to the ball. The man thought that still these girls were very beautiful, like the sun and moon in the flesh. The Viscount was annoyed. Rise began to approach him. Rise said that the man must have been Viccount Snail himself. He thanked the Viscount for inviting him to the party. Rise hoped they could get along. The Viscount interrogated Rise. Viscount asked Baron Rise where the pomposity in his voice was coming from. He angrily added that he was a Viscount and was above him in status. Rise remembered that Uncle Hohenheim had always spoken to him in such a pony-brotherly manner that he had completely forgotten the rules of socializing. Rise made a bow and apologized. He added that it had been a long time since he had gone out in public, and he had not had time to practice it. The Viscount was very angry. He thought that Rise was definitely mocking him. Viscount thought that Rise had already realized why he was invited here. Viscount said how dare he dress up like that and bring slutty women with him to show off his status. Rise interrogated. He explained that the Viscount had just said that he was superior in rank. The hero asked the Viscount what he had forgotten that he himself had said 10 seconds ago. Rise added that the Viscount must be tired. It seemed to Rise that this Viscount was very angry with him for something. The Viscount raised his hand to hit Rise. He called him names. Rise didn't understand what it was for. Someone yelled, which was enough. The Viscount was angry. He started calling that person names. That person turned out to be the Duke of Hohenheim. The Viscount was frightened. The Duke was very angry. The Duke turned to the Viscount, telling Snail to listen to him carefully. The Duke asked if it was dignified to bicker, and then try to cast a spell at a nobleman like the Viscount. Snail was startled. The Duke continued that it was a scandal that, at worst, could be followed by his imprisonment in a dungeon. The Viscount tried to justify himself. He said he was sorry and was only joking. The Viscount continued by asking the Duke why the Duke needed to attend such a modest and dismal celebration. The Viscount thought that the Duke was just a half-breed with no gift for magic. The Duke replied that he had been invited by Rise as a chaperone. The Duke approached Rise. He asked Rise that everything was correct. Rise replied in the affirmative. He apologized to the Duke for the inconvenience. Irina said that it was now clear what was meant by the best solution. Alicia agreed with her. She added that Duke Hohenheim did not possess magic, but his authority in high society was undeniable. Alicia said that no matter what Rise-sama did, she was sure he would definitely be fine. Rise turned to the nobles. He suggested that they each drink a glass to the meeting. The Viscount asked himself that Rise had taken over as the founder of his party. The feast was nearing its logical end. The nobles drank and enjoyed themselves. At Django Manor, the site of the festivities, Rise held a wine glass in his hands. He said that this was the first time another nobleman had invited him to the party. Rise added that he didn't like it here. He looked at the other guests. Rise thought that he probably shouldn't have invited Uncle Hohenheim. The Duke patted his back. He said there were a lot of important people here, but he didn't need to be afraid. Rise bowed to the Duke. He thought he should have tried to make peace with the master of the feast. Rise headed towards the table the Viscount was standing next to. Alicia and Irina looked over at him. The girls were smiling. They stood slightly behind Rise. Rise turned to Viccount Snail. The Viscount turned around. He said that it was Baron Rise, his commoner and beastman. He apologized and corrected himself. The man said it was Rise and his attendants. The Viscount asked him what he needed from him. Rise asked himself why he was shaking so much and he was sick. Rise replied that he just wanted to have a friendly chat. He continued that if the Viscount was tired from the festivities, he could go inside. Rise promised that he would see to order. The Viscount became indignant. He asked that Rise wanted to sweep his entire party under the rug. Rise asked himself why he was yelling like that. He thought that he was just worried about his health. The hero asked himself what was the big deal. Rise asked himself what to do. He realized that things were not easy with the Viscount. He looked at the girls. Alicia and Irina were laughing. The Viscount had insulted the girls. He said they were not allowed to laugh at him. Rise thought that the Viscount was again displeased. The hero concluded that it seemed the Viscount was also emotionally unstable. Rise got the idea that this was his chance to show the entire upper class how good he was. Rise felt it was necessary to calm the Viscount down first. He asked the Viscount to take it easy because he wouldn't let anyone make fun of him, not even his distinctive hairstyle. The Viscount got even angrier. He insulted Rise very loudly. Turning around, he noticed the Duke, who was also laughing. Viccount thought that Rise was trying to provoke him. He didn't understand why he wanted to. Viccount thought that this parody of a nobleman wanted to throw him off balance. He said that Rise was absolutely right. The man continued that a country boy like Rise would not understand the splendor of this hairstyle. He stroked his hair. Rise replied that he really didn't understand it at all. The Viccount thought that Babylon had decided to go all the way, and there was no turning back. Rise bowed. He continued that it seemed to him that the Viccount was trying to gather the scraps from the hair on his head into a semblance of a hairstyle. The Viccount was very angry. Rise's companions were laughing. Viccount yelled that he had had enough. He said there was a dragon in his territory, and if Rise continued to talk nonsense, he would sick the dragon on him. Rise replied that he had a dragon too. The Viccount shouted that it was a brazen lie, so he needed to admit it. Rise asked himself that he didn't happen to be talking about the dragon that lived in the abandoned mine. He was horrified. Rise realized that he had killed Snail's pet without permission. Rise asked the Viccount that he didn't happen to feel any affection towards that dragon. The Viccount replied that of course he was attached to it. Rise insulted him mentally. He asked himself who would ever get attached to a living killing machine. Rise thought that Snail had loved that dragon, and that he would be so upset when he found out. He figured he could make a new one, and quietly slip a new one in place of the slain one. The hero figured he would start treating him better after that, and not be so mean. Rise bowed to the Viccount. He said he would like to establish good relations with his neighbors, if that was possible. The Viccount replied that he should have mentioned the dragon, and the Baron spoke differently. He smirked. The Viccount continued that it was good that he was aware of that. He added that it was worth it now to realize how great he was, and try to gain his favor. Rise replied that he would try right away. He said that the Viccount had already tried launching a spell at him. The hero continued that for all he knew, the court could have sentenced him to prison for such a thing. But he was a good man, so he would forgive the Viccount. Rise asked that he had gained the Viccount's favor and was now all was well. The Viccount was puzzled. The Viccount was angry. He loudly insulted Rise. The Viccount was about to approach Rise, but fell face first into the ground. Rise didn't realize what was happening. One of the guests said that the Viccount had fainted. Another added that it was urgent to get a doctor. A third said that an aneurysm in his head could have ruptured, so he needed to be careful. Alicia collapsed with laughter at Irina. Duke Hohenheim stood a little further away and laughed as well. Rise became enthusiastic. He thought that this was another marvelous opportunity to gain the Viscount's favor. Rise said that if they didn't mind, he could use healing magic, but he was interrupted by a servant who apologized. They put the Viscount on a stretcher and were about to carry him away. The servant said he would recommend that the Viscount not call any more guests when he wasn't feeling well. He bowed and apologized. It didn't take a second, Rise thought. The Duke turned to Rise saying that he had made a great commotion. Rise replied to the Duke that it looked like the Viscount really wasn't feeling well. The Duke laughed. He said that was all Rise was talking about. The Duke asked Rise that, did he really arrange all this to cheer him up? The Duke thought that Rise had heard the nobles grinding his bones and wanted revenge on them. Rise questioned the Duke. He didn't understand what the Duke was talking about. The Duke was smirking at the same time. The Duke handed him a glass of wine. He said that he was drinking to Rise Babylon. He was glad that he had met Rise. The hero thanked him. He said that he should have kept striving for their goal, world peace. Alicia and Irina looked at them. Rise asked the Duke if he wanted to go to his estate together. It was noticeable that the party was coming to an end. The Duke replied that the night was still young. He added that he would let the alcohol flow in a river. The companions withdrew from the party. At Lord Babylon's estate, a drunken Rise slept with his face resting against the table. Alicia and Irina were sitting next to him. The Duke was laughing. He said that even the bravest heroes couldn't resist a couple pints. Alicia said he didn't seem to be used to drinking. Belle approached them with a tray of drinks. Irina said the drinks were marvelous. She turned to the Duke, asking that the Duke wasn't prejudiced against beastmen at all. The Duke replied that discriminating against an entire race just because of an inability to do magic was nightmarish foolishness. Irina turned to the Duke. She said that a battle was coming and they, the beastmen, were ready to supply him with a bomb recipe. The Duke became enthusiastic. He said it was that mysterious weapon. The Duke asked Irina that they would give it to him. Irina replied that only with Risadono's permission. Alicia said that the Duke had helped them a lot by preventing them from spreading information about Babylon's lands. The Duke replied that he wouldn't want the capital to know about the current state of Babylon's territory. He continued that it was worth noting. The clerics did a great job as well. He remembered that the spy had spoken well of the girl. The Duke had said that, in any case, he would not back down when the hour of battle came. The man clenched his hand into a fist. The interlocutors looked at each other. Rise was still asleep. Intrigue was brewing under his nose. The shore of Babylon's waters. Rise sat and fished. The dragonkin slept on his head. Rise realized that the opportunity to prove himself to the aristocracy was irretrievably lost. He thought he had a chance for a good first impression, and it ended up with Viccount Snail having a nervous breakdown. The float of the fishing rod began to move. Rise noticed it. He pulled on the rod to pull the fish out. The hero was not discouraged. He said that next time it would be the other way around because he would be the host of the party. Rise added that he would need the gift of persuasion. He said that instead, he could win over the guests with the riches of his lands. The hero continued that if he sent out an invitation on behalf of himself and the Duke of Hohenheim, most of the nobles would surely accept the invitation. The dragonkin grabbed Rise's catch and ate it. Rise said that, in that case, he needed to do some repairs. He went on to say that, for that matter, the panorama of the city shouldn't have been inferior to that of the capital. Rise was pulling the fishing rod in different directions. It made the dragonkin feel sick. Rise asked the dragonkin what he was doing. The dragonling was very embarrassed. Rise said he would need a lot of wood to rebuild the city. There was a field in front of him. He said there was just the right spot. Rise put the fishing rod on his shoulder. Rise tapped the fishing rod on the ground. He put on his gloves and started using magic. The hero used the spells of compost power, division, spore, multiply, and regenerate. In an instant, a forest appeared in front of him. Rise laughed. His healing magic always came in handy, he thought. But this wasn't healing magic. Rise remembered that ever since he was named God Apostle, his mana reserve had never stopped increasing. Rise said that it was time to put the plans into action. Klaus interjected that he was talking about redesigning the area. Rise answered in the affirmative. He said that it was only through the efforts of the people of Babylon that the lands had prospered. In his thoughts, he praised himself, their all-powerful lord, and his efforts. He sat at the table, with Alicia standing beside him. Irina was at the window, and Klaus stood still at the front of the table. Rise asked if they would work as a team. The friends were ready to help Rise. Irina asked that they were to build a castle in the center of the territory. Rise replied that it was something like that. He interjected himself that was it really about a castle. Rise figured it didn't matter, because if he threw a cool party, at least someone would come anyway. Klaus said that they didn't have a lot of options for the layout back then. He continued that they had to think things through carefully before they built. Alicia's eyes sparkled. She added that she knew someone who would definitely help them. Rise inquired who the person in question was. The girl replied that this person had been building secret passages in the royal palace, and then they wanted to kill him to keep his mouth shut. She added that after that incident, he believed in God. Rise said that was very curious. He continued that if he was entrusted with the palace, there was no question about his prowess. Rise asked that, in that case, why not copy the design of the royal palace? The friends liked the idea. Irina said that it was just a brilliant idea. She continued by saying that she imagined the faces of those pompous rich people when they would see the castle. She added that on top of that, they would paint everything black. The girl covered her eyes with her hand and laughed. Alicia began to cry with happiness. He said that it was a wonderful idea. Alicia explained that black was the color of the demiurge. She continued that she, as well as the other believers, would follow him to the end of this world. Rise thought that everything was going according to plan. He realized that in his lands almost everyone was a believer. Rise thought that, in addition, by copying the palace, he would show his modesty and loyalty to the royal family. This idea came to his mind quite randomly, but it was just perfect. He stood up. Rise said that without much delay, it was necessary to get started, and it was decided. Rise said that they had gotten a lot of work, and after all, he just wanted to throw a party. Everyone left the office. He was the only one left. Rise sat back down. He said he would need more materials than he had originally planned. The hero realized that he had to get the stone first. Rise stood up and walked over to the window. He said that now the dragon's training had to be even more intense so that he would be able to help with the loads as soon as possible. 3 months later, at the border of Snail Django's territory, the voices of men were heard. One of the men told the others to wait a little longer because they were almost there. The others shouted yes. The man was cursing Viccount Snail. He was very angry. The man promised that one day he would just destroy him. The borders of Babylon's territory were lined with tall and dense trees. A man with a beard shouted to the others to wait for him. Another man shouted to his companions to push on a bit more, for they must show what the dwarves were made of. His comrade, whose voice was barely audible in the crowd of men, asked if they would be alright if they ran away from here. Another man added that the territories of Babylon were famous for being very terrible. Their ringleader shouted for them to shut up because their words would knock their motivation and confidence. He shouted that the dastardly snail had been caught and the whole territory was reduced to rubble, and this was their only chance. Then the man added that he would never in his life forget the abuse they had suffered in Django's lands. It was not easy for them in those days. One day the gentleman from Django asked the dwarf crew if they really wanted to improve the quality of their food. One of the kneeling dwarves said that if they didn't get better food, they would die. The gentleman began to mock them, as if they were just mongrels who could not do anything and only demanded something. Then one of the kneeling men laughed loudly and hinted that there were more useless people than them. The gentleman got very angry. The man went on to say that more useless people could be considered those who left the mine because of their cowardice, so the Lord just had to provide them with all the materials they needed to forge. The master began to shout in rage that a slave from the lowest race had no right to make such a statement. The master raised his hand and magically destroyed this brave slave, in addition to shouting that he was a filthy and furry little thing to be destroyed. The other men were very upset that they had lost their chief. The Lord angrily added that he wished he could turn them all to ashes, but the dragon could leave. The Lord approached the man and told him that he would leave him for the day, the poem should be immensely grateful, and then left the room. The dwarf ringleader told his companions that even if they went to this hell, they would still be better off for it than being oppressed by this horrible lord. Everyone supported the ringleader with one voice. One of the men said that they could do it. After all, their blacksmithing skills were still intact. Another shouted that even if they came to the most horrible lands, if they stuck together they could do anything. The ringleader was insanely pleased that his team was willing to do anything, and shouted to them that once they crossed this path, would be free. They walked confidently, when suddenly the ringleader, who was called the chief, stopped abruptly. On his face there was a look of alarm. The chief's comrades were disturbed by his behavior and asked him what happened and why he stopped so abruptly. The men saw that the chief was looking into the distance, and when they came closer they could not believe their eyes. In front of them was a view of a huge and prosperous city. The city was incredibly large and was not like a ruin at all. It shocked all the men. They all started to ask the chief if this was supposed to be dead earth. The men were very surprised that such a thing was even possible. Suddenly they noticed a huge flying thing coming towards them. When the creature got closer, they realized that it was a real dragon, and sitting on it was a guy with dark hair. Sitting on the dragon, he called out to the scarred men and asked them if they had escaped from somewhere. They honestly answered that they had escaped and asked him to get off the dragon, because it was insanely dangerous. The guy stroked the dragon and said it was fine, because this dragon was Babylon's pet. The men were shocked that it was a pet. The dark-haired guy explained that it was all part of the dragon saddling program whereby their great Lord Ree has absolute submission. He told the men that they would have to climb on the dragon because they would be flying into the city. One of the men excitedly asked if he was the guy named Ree, at which point the guy himself jumped off the dragon. The guy approached the man and aggressively said that to him he was Ree himself, and if he ever said just Ree, he would die an agonizing death. Out of fear, the man hiccuped and remained silent. One of the men approached the guy and asked if Ree herself would help an inferior race like theirs. The guy said she would. The guy started to say that Ree herself is merciful and welcomes absolutely everyone, and he is also the one who saved everyone from their oppressors. Everyone calls him Lord Savior. The crowd of men stood in bewilderment looking at the guy who was talking so sweetly about Lord Savior. At the same time, something was going on in the Lord's former mansion. Ree herself was busy doing her own thing, as suddenly Alicia started calling his name. The girl came running over to the guy and said that she had found Ree's baby underwear herself, and gently asked if she could have it for herself. The guy exhaled heavily and said that if she wished, she could have it. Alicia began to jump with happiness and said that she would treasure this baby underwear all her life. As she left, the girl mumbled that these clothes were sacred objects and she always put them to good use. Ree herself was surprised that she was using them. After all, they were for children and unlikely to fit her. The guy then exhaled and said that Irina had locked herself in the storeroom, and after all, the Lord was moving into the castle now, so they needed to pack more carefully. The guy named Klaus called Ree herself and said that he had brought all the books and materials in the mansion, sorted by genre. A girl named Belle walked next to him. Ree herself walked up to the guy with the boxes and praised him, saying that he still had no equal. Klaus was surprised that Ree herself appreciated him so much. Klaus then reached into the box and said that he had found something interesting when he was sorting through the books. Klaus handed the boy a picture of Ree's father and his mother. The boy grabbed the picture and looked at it and said that he had long ago lost this picture of his late father and mother. Most likely it had been taken on their wedding day. Klaus said that his mother must have been incredibly beautiful. He wanted to tell them what he thought of when he remembered the Babylon weddings, but Rise interrupted him without letting him tell them. Rise herself told them that his mother was a crazy woman who met his father in a bar when they were both heavily intoxicated, and with all that, his parents were earls. Klaus felt embarrassed that Rise was telling everything in such detail, and apologized for his question. Then he said in a quiet voice that the boy had been born in wedlock. He replied that that was generally the case. Their conversation was interrupted by a maid, who told Rise herself that some urgent business in the Dragon Core had come up. Klaus and Rise herself looked at each other in bewilderment. They left the painting on the table and went to the Dragon Core. While they were walking to the right place, the maid explained the whole situation to Rise herself. The latter remembered that a lot of men who had escaped from Django's territory came to them. When the guy arrived, one of the men said that if he wanted to do something, then let him do it. Rise replied that they shouldn't worry and promised that he wouldn't bring them back, but he would do something first. He channeled his magical power into the men, and it turned out that he directed restorative magic on them. In that instant, all the wounds, burns, and fatigue disappeared from the men. The men were overjoyed, but felt that they were now obligated to do anything to pay this debt. However, Rise told them that they didn't have to worry about it, and then suggested that they were hungry for food. Rise himself ordered the maid to feed the hungry men. The girl replied that she would prepare everything right away. The boy stood and thought about the fact that if he was good to him, he would most likely do whatever he was ordered to do. Then he exhaled and thought about the fact that either way, the truth was that Snail was really bad. Suddenly the guy remembered something, and an uneasiness enveloped him. The guy remembered that he had killed Snail's hand dragon, and had completely forgotten to replace it with a new dragon. However, he quickly found a solution to the problem and decided that he would pull the whole thing off after the inauguration of the castle. Meanwhile, things were very tense in Django's territories, with the Lord yelling loudly at his subordinate. The subordinate tried to explain that the Lord had no reason, and especially his health, left much to be desired. He shouted that he didn't want to listen to him and chased him out of the room. Slanting his face with anger, the Lord said that he was going to conquer Babylon's territories and no one could stop him. The border of the kingdom of Noja. The territory of Babylon is the land of Risa Babylon, which has undergone unusual changes in its development. Tales of a bygone era mired in many scandals. Meanwhile, on Lord Babylon's estate, loud shouts of insults came into the room where Samuel Babylon was. He carefully placed his spoon on the dining table and said that once again such an early morning was ruined by the screams and lunatics. Then he mumbled that he couldn't take it anymore. He realized that this land was very poor and filled with these criminals, so they couldn't even harvest any crops. Absolutely all the people here are criminals, or sick people who have been banished. There is no one in their right mind in this land, including Samuel Babylon himself. He covered his face with his hand and said that on top of that, his parents died suddenly from intoxication. After a long night of drinking, he realized that this land needed urgent changes, but there are so many problems that need to be solved. Suddenly his wife's voice was heard. She came into the room and said that just then their baby whispered that he wanted some alcohol. Samuel shouted to her that really she just wanted a drink. The girl yelled that it was true and she wouldn't mind a drink right now. Then she said that he put his hands on her without even thinking that she would now be an important person in the family. Samuel yelled at her for this, for trying to add fuel to the fire. The girl did not understand anything at all. He suddenly began to tell himself that he could not do that. He was an adult. He understood that she was the Count's daughter, but he was annoyed that she was still acting like a little girl. That's why her own family didn't want to get involved with her. She tried to drink herself to death out of her anger and then met Samuel, who was drinking in the same bar at that moment out of sheer stress. Clutching his head, he genuinely regretted that their places were close that night, that he had gotten so drunk and attacked her. In a moment he noticed the girl laughing and asked what was so funny about it. In response, she sincerely replied that she was just insanely happy. She walked up to the guy and said that she had been alone at home all her life, but now it was just the two of them. Or rather the three of them, if you add their child. Samuel looked away and told her that he was happy to hear that. Then the girl suddenly added that it would be much better if they could have a better life. Samuel shouted that was why she shouldn't start such conversations. Suddenly a shout was heard outside the doors. Someone was threatening the Lord loudly. The girl was very frightened and Samuel took her hands to keep her calm. A bunch of men in tattered clothes piled into the room. One of them raised his sword and said he was sorry, but this land belonged to them from now on. Samuel covered his wife with his hand and asked him how dare he raise his sword on his pregnant wife. Samuel raised his hand and used the magic of gravity so that there was no trace of those brave men. He mumbled that he shouldn't underestimate the worst of the land. After all, he was used to hard cases and was far more knowledgeable than the other nobles. The only thing he felt sorry for was the floors, which would have to be cleaned and repaired again. Suddenly Elise put her arm around the boy, and in doing so surprised him greatly. She looked at him and told him that he was very cool and a real hero who saved her. The girl was insanely happy that she had married Samuel. Samuel, without giving into emotion, said that he was really just a murderous evil lord. He expected the girl to be scared, but she said that she knew perfectly well that he was a murderous evil lord. Samuel was surprised that she didn't even deny it. Samuel prayed to the Lord that their child would not resemble her, much less himself. After a while, their unwanted child was born. Samuel was glad that their prayers to the Lord had been answered, for their son was born insanely benevolent, and it was hard to believe that he had the blood of a murderous evil lord running through him. What was also surprising was the fact that he turned out to be quite a bright boy. However, he still wasn't a perfect child. Samuel remembered the moment when their son had tried to hold a fish he caught and used restorative magic on it, and all the fish in the body of water had died. It just so happened that he had raised a monstrous child, because Elise's shallowness and Samuel's devilishness were present in him. The kingdom of Babylon even has a national humiliation, a fake royal castle in its own lands, and only a few people knew about it due to the strong censorship. Rise herself raised her hand and shouted that today they would celebrate the opening of the castle with a raucous party. The festival began in the kingdom. Rise Sama said that everyone could eat and drink as much as their souls desired. The festival was going well. A lot of people had gathered. Everyone was happy with the drinks and food, which couldn't help but please Rise Sama. Rise herself approached Irina and Alicia and said that they should thank the workers properly. Inside herself, the guy decided that they should be looked after. Alicia cheerfully replied that it was very much like him, for he was always discreet. Rise herself turned to Irina and asked if she would like to go for a proper walk. She answered that she didn't want to, but she was drooling over the food that was being served at the festival. Alicia noticed Irina's reaction to the food and specifically told her that there are rumors that they mass-produce high-quality meat. And after these words, Irina found it even harder to hold on. She very quickly ran to the food tables to taste that very high-quality meat. Irina asked Alicia not to go too far away so that she wouldn't get lost. Alicia waved her hand and said that Irina-san her dearest friend, and then she shouted that it's a festival, so it's okay if a little out of bounds. Rise herself remained silent. The girl suddenly fell to the guy and heavily articulating speech said that she was a little drunk. Rise himself laughed, because she started drinking from the very beginning, and actually drunk a lot. His friend became uncomfortable with Alicia standing so close to him in a crowded place. It turned out that she had purposely planned it so that they were surrounded by people in dark robes and couldn't be seen. The excitement made the boy's breath hitch. He felt insanely embarrassed, because he was a guy, so he should be the one who starts flirting with girls and ends up getting attacked by the female gender. Alicia saw the look on the guy's face and wondered if he hated her. Rise was worried sick, and inside himself he kept saying that he had to be patient, because he had sworn that he would never succumb to her charms in his life. Suddenly, such a poignant moment was interrupted by a man's voice that called out to the boy. It was Klaus, and he said that he needed to talk to him urgently about that most urgent matter. Klaus walked closer to the guys, and seeing their tense looks asked if he had come at a bad time. For Rise himself, Klaus had been a savior at that moment, so he was glad he had come. Klaus revealed that people had drank a lot more alcohol than they were supposed to, so he was starting to miss it. Rise told him that he had noticed that, because everywhere he looked there was alcohol. However, he expected it, so he knows how to solve this problem. The guy put on his black gloves and went to the fountain. He approached the fountain and asked for attention from his men, then poured a glass of wine into the fountain and activated his magic. Suddenly, the water in the fountain changed to wine, which shocked everyone, because this is a real miracle for an ordinary person. Rise herself proudly shouted to her people that he always does whatever they ask. In fact, he was secretly practicing his best speech. Rise himself told Klaus that if there was such a party, inviting nobles wouldn't be any big problem. The guy was greatly surprised by his words. He couldn't believe that Revenge was able to invite other nobles to the party. Rise herself noticed Guy's violent reaction, but kept silent. Alicia said that now that they had become cohesive and united under Rise Sama, they shouldn't have any problems. Rise thought about what could happen if they made the area public. Irina said that there was nothing wrong with just having fun. Rise realized herself that if they made the territory public, they could start a war. The men shouted that they needed to show everyone what they could do with such steel bodies. One old man turned to the guy flying the dragon that they needed to increase their bomb production to the maximum. The guy added that they would then set up a cavalry coordination and show everyone their strength. One of the men said that the bombs sounded very encouraging. Then another said that the dwarfs would be developing new weapons. The girls in the crowd nodded silently, believing that the men of their people were incredibly strong. After such talk, the people were prepared for a great change. Suddenly, Rise herself became worried. After all, this guy just wants to brag about his lands, which seemed ridiculous. Later that day, Rise-sama took his lantern and went to the secret place. He was glad to get away from the crowd that was going to make noise until the morning. But that's exactly what his gut was all about. Turns out the guy had come to the Marble Dragon farm and had taken one. On the way back, Rise herself had noticed that the place used to be crawling with bandits and alcoholics, but now it was very peaceful. The guy was glad that the people were prepared now. He walked a little bit and came to the location he wanted and said that it would be nice if everything went smoothly. He carefully placed the Marble Dragonkin on the ground. He realized that it wasn't good to accidentally destroy someone's pet, so he would have to secretly replace it later without anyone noticing. The boy put on his magic gloves to cast his sorcery. He channeled his magic into this small marble dragon, and in a second, this small dragon turned into a huge dragon. It looked very unusual. Rise herself wondered if he had probably overdone it and something had gone wrong. The dragon roared loudly. Rise noticed that its oddity was that it was slightly reddish and pulsing unusually, but he decided not to make a big deal of it and added that Snail wore a red suit as well. Rise herself said goodbye to the dragon and ordered him to be nice to Mr. Snail. Meanwhile, the dragon was screaming exhaustedly. The boy thought about his people again, where people used to speak different languages. Happy Rise herself said that the deed was done, so now he could go home and go to bed, and since he had done a good deed today, he should get a good rest. There was something wrong with the screaming dragon, for when Rise-sama left, blood flowed from his wings and his body was covered in strange bumps. The blood splattered on the ground and grass. Suddenly the dragon turned into something terrifying. Not like any other creature, many different offshoots appeared, and blood spurted out from the bumps onto them. That was how the Veil of Nightmares opened. Rise returned to the castle after the creation of the dangerous creature. He went to bed with peace of mind, not realizing that he had done something terrible. At this time, the others continued to celebrate the opening of the castle, also not suspecting that something terrible would happen. Meanwhile, in Django's lands, preparations for war were underway. The Mad Master ordered all of his troops to move into Babylon's territory. All the troops remained silent. Only one guy in the crowd cheered in a dejected voice, while the rest of the troops didn't even pretend to be ready for the attack. This behavior of the subordinates made the Lord very angry. He began to ask why their cry was so pathetic, if they had any objections to his plan. His servant tearfully asked them to come to their senses, because they had no reason for this war. However, the Lord simply gagged him and said that this could be taken care of later. The soldiers in the formation began to discuss amongst themselves that the rumors of an unwarranted attack were most likely true. One of the men commented that it was like saying power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Lord continued to shout that they would be dealing with a bunch of outcasts and criminals. It would be a sweep of the kingdom. The ranks started talking about how not only was there nothing to loot in Babylon, but their women left a lot to be desired. The Lord began to shout in rage that he didn't care at all. He just wished they would kill every single inhabitant. With a smile, he thought about the fact that even if they failed, they would destroy each other themselves due to internal squabbling, and thought it could be made to look like a dragon fight from the mine. Suddenly, the sound of that most terrifying dragon was heard in the sky. The earth was darkened by the shadow of that huge dragon. All the troops were terrified, not knowing what to do. Finally, the dragon was hovering right above them, and the men could see it clearly, but it made them even more scared and they started to catch panic. The men's voices merged into one loud rumble. Some shouted that they were finished. Some were shocked that the dragon had finally appeared. They began to regret that they had made too few sacrifices for it to go beyond the mountains. One of the men remarked that this dragon was much bigger than he had heard, and its color was completely different. All the men began to run away in terror to wherever they were going, and the Lord, blinded by bloodlust, began to shout at them to take revenge on Babylon. But a fleeing servant shouted to him that he was on his own now. Suddenly the dragon stopped and there were more swelling bumps on his body. The dragon growled something inaudible and continued to increase in size, and after a second, all its bumps exploded, spurting blood right behind the soldiers. Everyone thought that the terrible dragon exploded and the trouble is over. The Lord immediately began to think that thanks to the explosion they can restore the excavation of the mine. And also they will call someone to be called a dragon killer. However, after a couple of seconds, the soldiers who were hit by the blood felt a burning sensation on their bodies. The dragon blood was simply eating away the human bodies. And instead of a human body, the organs and skin of the dragon grew. This became clear when one of the soldiers turned into a dragon. He started screaming that he was insanely hungry and needed people to satisfy his hunger. Every soldier who got a drop of blood on him became a dragon, so there were more and more of them. The blood got on the Lord himself. He felt his skin become rougher and huge horns came out of his head. He realized that the dragon would not have come here on its own, only if it had attacked earlier. The last thing he said in his half-human state was that Rye's Baybalin had done well. Meanwhile, all was quiet in the territories of Baybalin. Rise himself had woken up early in the morning, and having had a good night's sleep he said that it was a nice refreshing morning. Klaus approached the boy and said that since Rise Sama was so disciplined, there were still a lot of bodies lying around the city. The boy looked at him with a smile. Then Rise said that some people were still drinking anyway, like Arena, who would wake up with a hangover, and Klaus could use some sleep. Klaus approached the boy and said that it was his duty to accompany Rise Sana, so he couldn't leave him when he had so many enemies among the nobles. Rise Sana was surprised that he had enemies among the nobles. Then, Klaus suddenly talked about the girls who often rubbed shoulders with Rise Sana. Klaus said that they used to be models for Beal Sensei's love story. While he was telling this, the girls stood around the corner and overheard their conversation. When Klaus started talking about their past, they became very embarrassed. He then said that the servants had decided to take the day off today, but there was something wrong with their presence, and it was probably because Rise-san had a strong, respectful aura. Rise thought to himself that everything was fine. However, something was still bothering him. He suddenly caught himself thinking that he was still flirting. He walked down the hallway and passed the girls and said that they had the day off today, so they could rest. The girls thanked him for his courtesy and told him that if they didn't, the head maid wouldn't let them know the end of the story. Rise herself replied that she understood them and then added that there was a feeling that they were getting very tired lately anyway. He thought he was allotting them enough days off. The story about Beal Sensei's love list stuck in his head. The girls apologized to the guy and said that it was time for them to go clean up after the festival. When the girls left, Klaus came over and Rise herself asked him what it was about. The guy answered with a question, saying that isn't it an artist who is a favorite among some citizens and girls. Rise herself smiled and touched her chin, saying that Baybalin had blossomed enough to allow herself to enjoy art. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from Alicia. She ran up to the boys. Rise asked her what happened and what was the rush. With fear in her eyes, Alicia replied that refugees from the lands of Django had arrived in their territory. Their villages had been destroyed by an unknown magical beast. The boys were shocked by this news. Rise herself ran out to the center of the kingdom and announced to the refugees from Django that he was the lord of the kingdom and said that he heard that their village in Django lands had been destroyed. The guy wanted to find out from them what happened. The refugees began to idolize the Lord for being so benevolent. They asked for revenge for their families, but Rise wanted to know what had happened in their lands. The lad realized that they were greatly disturbed and putting on his gloves used recovery magic, through which he calmed their minds and made them honest. At the same moment, the dirt right as well as the fatigue disappeared. The girl thanked him for his help. Alicia hugged Rise herself and praised his skill. The guy said that since they had calmed down, they should tell them what had happened in Django. One of the men began to tell them that it must have happened just before dawn. Just before dawn, a farmer in a rural county had a cow mooing. Its cry woke the man up and he wondered if some animal had gotten into the barn. He added to his story that at that moment all the warriors had been mobilized by the Lord. Suddenly the cow's screaming stopped, which frightened him and he decided to go and check what had happened. He silently approached the barn. He kept a stick with him just in case. As he looked inside, he was overcome with shock and fear. The man saw one of those soldiers who had turned into fearsome dragons. He had torn apart a cow and was eating its meat. When the dragon man turned around, the farmer screamed in terror and ran far away. The dragon man started to follow him. The man ran with all his legs, shouting loudly that there was a monster in the village. He hoped that those who heard him would be able to run away and survive. Suddenly he ran into a man who yelled at him and told him to run away. The farmer saw that he was hurt and wanted to help. The man explained to him that one of the dragon men had bitten him. The farmer tried to help him, however the man yelled that his body was on fire, and after a couple seconds his body started to turn scales. The man also turned into a dragon. Then the farmer apologized for not being able to save and ran away. There was a huge scary dragon flying over the village. After hearing the story, Ree herself shouted that it looked like Viccount Snail had turned into a demonic beast. The refugee replied that that was the case and he was sure of it. Ree herself thought about the rest of the staggering information as well. He found it very strange that the warriors had been summoned right at the moment of the attack, and apparently their boss Viccount Snail. The guy said that the ability to turn a person you bite into your own kind was horrible. Klaus asked the guy if he understood everything. Ree herself stood up on the dais and tell all the people of Django territory to listen to him carefully. He explained to them that the whole secret of this monster is that it is artificially made. He said that if the monster that turns everyone into its own kind was real, the whole world would have been destroyed long ago. People supported his thought. He then said that of course it would be an impossible task for an ordinary person, but perhaps he was created by someone who can use magic. He said that in other words, the dragon was created by the mage snail. The refugees immediately thought of him summoning all his troops to turn them into monsters. Ree said that they were right, because everything was working out too well for coincidence. Snail planned to turn them all into his kind, and create a huge demonic army. And in fact this dragon was actually created by Ree's sauna. Ree thought about the fact that Snail had always prided himself on having dragons, but it turns out that he was lying to everyone and they were just his test subjects to create a draconizing virus and rule the world with it. The maids come running to the guy and announce that the evacuees from Django's lands keep arriving Babylon, and absolutely everyone is reporting that they are being attacked by an unknown demonic beast. An alarmed Ree of Sauna said that they could not waste a second. He turned to his men and the refugees again, saying that evil magic has turned Viccount Snail into a demonic dragon and he is going to subjugate the world, turning each of his subordinates into a demonic beast, one by one. Guy ordered Klaus and Irina to gather everyone who can fight now, because they have a duty to save the people from Django. He turned to Alicia and said that she would help with the refugees and if there were any wounded among them, let her bring them to him. The boy shouted that he would not let the evil mage Snail do whatever he wanted. He promised that the tranquility of this world would be saved by him. The capital of Django state could be seen on the map. Thanks to a strong ruling dynasty, these lands prospered so much that it was hard to believe it was a county. However, right now, this place was tantamount to hell. And right now, the acting lord was turning into a monster while leading an army. Through the use of evil magic, a demonic dragon was created. The dragon seemed to be going crazy and screaming about killing Babylon. To top it all off, he retained his memories and returned to his lands. The people were terrified and screamed that they were finished. Even if this thing didn't eat them, they would just be turned into monsters. One of the locals prayed to the great goddess Sophia and begged them to save and preserve them. The protagonist interrupted their cries and ordered them to stop it. As Ree's Babylon, the hero was about to deal with the wicked army of the evil dragon. He told him that he was going to end their tyranny. In his mind, the hero thought there were a lot of them, and he was actually scared as hell. He knew he was repeating himself, but this guy was the real culprit. For a moment, all of the dragons froze in place, then amicably went on the offensive. Ree thought it was okay, since everyone was standing behind him, and he knew everything would be fine. He stretched his hand forward and exclaimed that the dragon had already done enough evil. At the same moment, tree trunks sprouted from the ground and pierced the dragon's bodies through and through. As the trees disappeared, the wounded creatures collapsed to the ground. The huge dragon followed suit and destroyed with its huge carcass all the buildings in the neighborhood. The locals were surprised to see Lord Babylon here. They assumed that the guy was a supreme magician and what he had created was simply unbelievable. The guy who prayed to the goddess thought that Ree might be the god's apostle. The protagonist told his enemies that they were victims of Snail's atrocities and asked for permission to save them. Ree crossed his arms in front of him and at the same instant a bright light came out of his hands. Dazzling sparks of light illuminated the dragons. One of the guys asked the locals to look at the monsters, or rather what was happening to them. The dragons, who didn't understand anything, looked at their hands. Their bodies were healing and washing away all the dirt. The locals were shocked that these creatures were back to normal. But that wasn't the only thing that had changed. All the residents that burned in the fire were incredibly healed. One of the men froze with shock as he looked at the revived patients and exclaimed that it was just unbelievable. No one had any idea who this mysterious guy was. He brought the monsters back to normal and saved everyone on the verge of death. The locals called out to Ree's Babylon and asked him to heal those who were hurt by the monsters. The hero asked them not to worry, As a completely unaccustomed aristocrat to the people, the hero asked them to see him put an end to the chaos that the evil mage Snail had caused. With the goal of bringing good fortune and tranquility to these people, he would put an end to it. With his words, his underlings prepared to attack. Irina took aim with her bow and instantly released several arrows into the monsters at once. A couple of them collapsed to the ground and some of them were wounded. But Irina's attack didn't stop them and they rushed to attack. Klaus decided to help Irina and swung his sword at the monsters closest to him. The guy skillfully delivered several blows at the same time and cut the monsters' bodies into pieces. Reese asked the guys to cover him while he healed them. Irina and Klaus smiled at the hero and said they understood him. The wounded dragons that lay on the ground soon after healing turned back into humans. Afro Guy hefted a few onto his shoulders and exclaimed that everything had gone perfectly, and the recovery was complete. He told the others that these monsters couldn't bite them through their steel bodies, so they should have concentrated on saving them. The locals understood and agreed with the boss. Watching from the side, Alicia smiled and exclaimed that Rise herself was as amazing as always. Everything was going according to their plan. As soon as she snapped her fingers, a subordinate appeared right behind her back. A mysterious man in a robe and hood bowed to the girl. Alicia ordered him to grab a few of them before Rise herself finished reincarnating them. The subordinate wanted to make sure Alicia was sure of that. Alicia replied that the power of the evil dragon could certainly become the power of Rei's Sama. She thought that Rice was a very kind man, so she is sure that he wished to save everyone. Meanwhile, the hero was ecstatic and thought everything was pretty darn cool. Their business was going really well. They were almost done rescuing people from the Django and everyone had also gotten by without any casualties. Now it was just a matter of getting the job done. All that was left was to kill the disgusting thing that was lying on its back and cursing Risa Babalon. It was one of those people who wouldn't even think of returning the snail to normal. Thanks to Rise's magic, the people who had become demonic dragons regained their former appearance. The enraged dragon rose to his feet and howled that he would finish off Rise Babalon. And all that was left for the hero to do was to take care of the source of all evil. Actually, it wasn't. He should have taken care of Viccount Snail, who had become an evil dragon. The hero took a close look at this huge thing and thought about how to kill this guy. It seemed that the thought of transforming the snail didn't even enter his head. Reese thought it would be easier if the dragon riders beat the crap out of him before he turned into mincemeat himself. The hero should have taken care of how to pour out all the anger of the victims. It would be scary to hold back all that accumulated anger. After thinking it over carefully, Rise finally came to a conclusion. He called out to all the villagers and asked them to listen to him. He told them that Snail Django was the source of all the troubles. In his search for power, he had renounced his humanity in favor of dragon humanity. He tried to turn all humans into monsters and control them. This guy was going to take over the whole world, and surely people could not forgive him for such an atrocity. The locals supported Reese and raised their fists up. Altogether they shouted that this was not forgivable. In that case, the hero ordered them to wipe away their tears and prepare themselves, for they still had a chance to take revenge. Because of these words, the people gained fighting spirit. Reese used healing magic on all the people nearby, and their wounds healed. Reese suggested that the guys kick the dragon's ass and save the world. In other words, he suggested that people should become heroes. The locals felt their power overflowing and it was amazing. It seemed to them that nothing could stop them now. One of the men grabbed a huge block of earth and threw it straight at the dragon. The dragon didn't expect an ordinary man to be able to attack it in this way, and grabbed the blow right in the face. The dragon lost his temper and opened his mouth and screamed that they were real freaks. The humans ordered him to shut his mouth and die quickly, for they stood guard over the world. These words angered the dragon even more. He didn't understand at all what these stupid humans were carrying. At this moment, another huge and hard piece of earth flew into his head. Bleeding from his nose, the dragon wailed that they would die for it. The dragon tilted its huge head upwards and started preparing to attack. Irina panicked and called out to Raise, but the hero replied that it was fine and he would handle it. The hero called out to the dragon riders and ordered them to start bombarding. After his order, many cube-shaped guns came down from the sky. A sudden rain of shells rained down on the dragon. Under the many blows, the dragon was hurled to the ground. The locals froze in surprise, not realizing what was happening. Some assumed it was magic. One of the boys noticed some objects in the sky and asked to look up there. Countless black objects appeared in the sky from beyond the horizon. They all had wings like dragons, but the people couldn't figure out what they were. Looking closer, it could be seen that they were people riding dragons. Irina and Klaus also prepared to attack, and Alicia kept her eyes on them with fascination. Afro Guy smiled and said that apparently a new legend was being born. The hero hoped that Snail saw this. This was what the true power of friendship looked like. Everything that was happening was the fruits of Reese's endeavors and sucking up to the people around him. Reese believed that this cocky snail was the source of all the chaos. The huge dragon looked at the hero in bewilderment, not understanding what he was saying. Moments flashed before Snail's eyes as he began to transform into a dragon. Reese smirked smugly, remembering all the moments with Snail that had happened between them earlier. Snail became furious and moved to insults towards the guy. The dragon went on the attack, about to finish off Reese. The hero clenched his hand into a fist and replied that he would not let Snail kill him. The whole world wished for Reese to restore the world, but Snail thought that the world had never wished for it and began threatening Reese with death again. The dragon felt some sort of vines encompassing his body. Not realizing what was wrong, he looked at the spiky plants and felt himself losing his strength. The hero called out to the angry snail and said that this was his punishment for trying to take over the world. But the dragon thought he didn't even have that in mind. Reese replied that the dragon would become a statue for eternity and watch over this world. After his words, the dragon's huge body glowed. The terrified Snail clutched his head, denying everything that was happening to him now. His entire body was covered with spiky vines of Reese. Darina, Klaus, and the rest of the town raised their heads in surprise. It was simply unthinkable to everyone, for the huge dragon had turned into a thick and tall tree with a lush crown. People exclaimed that it was simply unbelievable, for before their eyes, Viccount Snail had become a tree. People thought that this guy was a real idiot. They had no doubt that such a fate awaited everyone who tried to take over the world. One of the men smirked and told the dragon that he would rot here forever, watching them, and in the meantime they would protect the Django with their own forces. It was finally over, but it left a small scar on the land. The city was practically reduced to rubble. The trees that Reese created are what later turned the city into ruins. But the important thing was that everyone was alive, and Reese believed that they should not have despaired. He suggested that the people rebuild this city together from scratch. The locals called out to Reese himself and believed he was absolutely right. Luckily, they had this huge tree and could clear it and live inside. The hero thought it would become the greatest tree house this world had ever seen. The inhabitants were delighted with this idea and agreed with him. With that, the boy suggested that they start work. Snail looked at the people below in horror and asked them to come to their senses and stop. Apparently, Snail's suffering was just beginning. Viccount Snail, that became an evil dragon through the use of unholy magic, was defeated by the savior Rise. Meanwhile, somewhere in the middle of the desert, a girl was walking and thinking about the meaning of life. All she wanted was water. With these thoughts, she tore off her sun cloak. The girl laughed and replied to herself that it didn't make any difference, because people had a water mage like her. Those people kept pestering her to wear that cloak while she traveled through the desert. But she was just able to create a reflective water barrier around her. Plus, it kept the temperature down. The same traveler who recently asked for water in their desert town was actually a water goddess named Selishia all along. However, she just wanted to pretend to be an ordinary traveler, but she had had enough. In fact, the fool who was walking through the desert wearing only this garment was definitely not an ordinary one. Selishia raised her hand up and was going to show everyone how awesome she was. She was going to take care of all the water problems in this village, and she was going to be honored just like Risa. Now that she had her mind made up, it was worth getting cleaned up first. The girl was glad that no one was around. She took off all her clothes and used her water magic to rinse her body. The water bubble also covered her clothes to wipe off all the dirt. The matter remained to be done. Selishia clenched her hand into a fist and dried all her clothes. After the girl dried the clothes, she put the clean clothes back on herself. Now all that was left to do was to conduct all that water to the big city. Selishia was going to do that before her food ran out. Somewhere on the border of the kingdom of MANHWA was a land of sun and desert called Sancredal. One of the locals that was in town called out to a man in a cloak and asked to see it. The dark-haired man, who understood nothing, turned to the old man. They saw a woman approaching them from the desert side. The villagers could not understand how she crossed the desert alone, wearing only this garment. The men decided to be careful, for it could have been a monster in the guise of a man. Selishia, meanwhile, came closer to the town and smirked. It was worth it just to look at the locals who made such a scene for her. They must have mistaken her for the goddess Sophia. One of the villagers noticed this girl smirking at them and found it disgusting. The woman suggested he report everything to Lord Ree, but the other man thought it was not worth bothering the Lord. They needed to take care of other things first. He reminded the others how difficult it was for them to buy water these days. The dark-haired man suggested just watching her from above, and the others decided he was right. Perhaps they would finally get to see how their guards really worked. Selishia thought it was strange that the men suddenly disappeared somewhere, and assumed that her splendor was too much for them. She didn't think it was important, for she needed to hurry up and show everyone what she could do. Selishia called out to all the desert people. She knew how hard it was for them without water, so she was determined to give them a heavenly blessing. As soon as she said this, the clear sky was covered with clouds and the long-awaited rain came. The shocked men stared up at the sky and exclaimed that it was impossible. From nowhere, water fell straight down from the clouds. A dark-haired, bearded man said he prayed to the gods that it would finally happen. One of the surprised men suggested that it was magic. The girl brought rain without asking for anything in return, so the man was puzzled even more. Selishia hadn't seen the men yet, but she was sure that they were on a rampage right now. It seemed to her that just a little more and she would be able to see them. After a while, the clouds parted and the sky was once again lit up with bright sunshine. The girl introduced herself by her name and said that as long as she was here, from now on they would never again be strangers to thirst. The locals assumed that this girl was a noblewoman, but they didn't understand why she would do something like this for ordinary people. They couldn't believe that Selishia was actually willing to cause rain all this time. Selishia smiled sweetly and said that if the people were happy, then she was happy too. Besides, this was not a problem for her. The girl was already anticipating how she would be honored for it. One of the locals thought that she was going against the teachings of Sophia's church, using magic for the sake of commoners like them. He suggested that she might have been their real savior. Selishia realized that this was a real fool who hadn't thought anything through. All the people kneeled down in a friendly manner and bowed to their savior. Selishia was choking on her saliva with happiness. This was exactly what she wanted, to become like Ree's Kun. That's exactly what the frustrated girl thought until she was behind bars. Selishia cried out that she had created the rain because people were lacking water. And at that moment, the people were very happy. A man named Dramon Sankredal, who was 42 years old, came up to her. He explained that this was the very reason why she was locked up here. Water was an extremely important resource in this country, and they could not allow her to lower its values as she wished. Selishia stared at the man in shock, not realizing what he was saying. Moreover, there was a law in this country forbidding everyone from using magic except the Lord, and obviously she had violated it. The girl exclaimed that she didn't know that there was such a law here, but the man thought she should always have looked up the laws and rules of the country she was traveling to. The thing was, magic was an extremely powerful thing. There were many other lords who had set the same law to avoid problems. Anyway, she was on their wanted list for destroying the village. Selishia smiled awkwardly and said that there was nothing she could do about it. The man felt that it would be up to the court to decide all of this. What to do with her regarding all this was not in his competence. But the man was still obliged to punish her for breaking the law. At the sight of the horrible executioner with the black sack over his head, the girl screamed and begged him not to do it. There was nothing personal here, but when anyone broke the law, they were punished. As a noblewoman, she should have realized that. It was as if Selishia didn't hear the man and shouted that she didn't mean it because she hadn't done anything wrong to them. For a while, the man watched as the girl fell to the floor and started rolling on the ground in screams. At some point, out of nowhere, a large wave of water rushed into the corridors of the dungeon. Dramon didn't understand what was wrong and swore profanities. The angry man called out to the Selishia and assumed it was her doing. The girl did not even deny it and shouted that she had called for the wave. She believed that all these people had not stopped hurting her and continued to sob bitterly. Dramon was about to stop the Selishia and directed a vortex of his magic at her. Selishia continued to sob like nothing happened, as if she saw absolutely nothing. Dramon realized that his magic was not as strong as Viccount Snail's, but he had no idea that the girl could block it so easily. The worried assistant and the executioner said they should have run away first. Dramon ordered the girl to stop, because at this rate she would drown herself. She must have realized that, so Dramon asked her to stop doing that. The girl smirked and reminded that she was a water mage and could dissolve in water, so it was okay. Dramon didn't understand what she was saying. Judging from her words, she only wanted to drown them. But in that case, the man didn't understand what reason she had for coming here in the first place. Selishia thought it was obvious and reminded him that she had come here to help them. Dramon called her a murderer and ordered her to shut up. The girl became so upset that all of her clothes were swallowed by her own water. Selishia kept crying in the nude and said that she had come here to help them, and yet they kept hurting her. But after a while the girl through her tears proudly lifted her head up and decided that tears could not help sorrow. In that case, she decided to clean herself up and go to another country. After getting out of the dungeon, the girl dramatically raised her hand up and exclaimed that she would become a hero like Ree's Kun. She cheered herself up and said that she would succeed. Thus, the legend of the great outlaw of their era, Selishia Palace side began. 2 weeks had passed since the battle with the dragon Snail. At this point, the protagonist was in his castle of Babylon. Duke Hohenheim exclaimed that it was wonderful and called Rhys his dear friend. He thought that the lad was indeed a hero of this country. Rhys bowed and replied to the Duke that it was an honor to receive such compliments from him, but he had this to say about the fact that he didn't have to bother to come here. The Duke cheerfully embraced Rhys and exclaimed that they were in friendship, so the hero Yen should have acted like he wasn't family. Besides, he was looking forward to seeing Rhys's castle. Rhys thought it was almost the same as the king's castle, but apparently it interested Uncle Hohenheim. Still, the Duke had seen real royal castles before. The hero wanted to ask the Duke what happened to the Django territories. Hohenheim smiled at the lad and exclaimed that he was planning to give them to the Ryza. In his heart the hero was madly jubilant, but in reality he only embarrassedly thanked the Duke for his decision. The Duke warned the hero and told him what he should have known about it. Even the king had heard about what had happened, and also the Duke had hidden quite a few things. Rhys looked at Hohenheim questioningly, not sure what he was talking about. The Duke surprised the lad with the news that Rhys would have to meet the king in person in a month. In his mind, Rhys was screaming with joy like that. Now even the king knew how cool he was. Rhys would want his ancestors to know that he would have a meeting with the king. The Duke grinned, realizing that even Rhys could be nervous. He asked the guy not to be afraid, because the Duke told the king that Rhys was an obedient person who respected the royal family. Therefore, the Duke believed that everything should be fine during their meeting. The hero nervously clenched his hand into a fist as he sat in the chair opposite Hohenheim. Rhys replied to the Duke that he had 2 ideas he wanted to share with him. The Duke smiled with willingness to listen to Rhys's suggestion. Rhys put his finger up and said that the first thing he would like to throw would be a party to celebrate the joyous occasion and invite other nobles. The Duke was shocked and got up from his chair when Rhys suggested that the king himself be invited to this party. If Hohenheim understood correctly, the hero was going to invite other nobles and even the king to this castle. With those words, the Duke's wide eyebrows frowned. What the hero didn't say was that he had built this castle to make the other nobles realize how great Babylon had become. He was sure that by inviting the king there, they would finally get rid of their terrible reputation. The hero would have the maids send a letter to the king. It would say that Rhys wanted the king to see the current state of the Babylon with his own eyes. Hohenheim hesitated and said that it became clear to him. After thinking it over well, the Duke smirked and suggested that the guy do it. The man decided to trust Rhys's brilliant mind and do as he said. Rhys was thrilled that Uncle Hohenheim really did understand everything. But in his father's opinion, a brilliant mind wasn't even a match for a slug. The Duke abruptly got up from his seat and said that in that case, he would have to hurry up and prepare for everything. To his great regret, he asked his dear friend's permission to leave. The hero was surprised that he was leaving already so soon. Rhys wondered for what reason the Duke had actually come here. Soon the carriage, along with the Hohenheim, traveled past wheat fields. The man made a clap of his hands several times. A few seconds later, a woman's voice came from the roof, which echoed back to the Duke. The Duke assumed that they would not be able to hide what was happening for long. The girl confirmed that this was unfortunately the case. They cooperate with the demiurgic church to keep things under control, but what happened this time was too much for them. It was only a matter of time before the investigation team from the capital arrived. The Duke speculated that they could have tried sending assassins after the Riz. The girl replied that the most capable man in the church was always watching him, so she believed everything would be all right. The man smiled and thought that his dear friend was as wonderful as ever. Everything was happening according to his calculations, and the Duke was sure of it. He had never imagined that Rhys would go so far as to even invite the king himself, despite being the lord of a territory considered the lowest of the low. In the Duke's view, it was a skillful form of provocation. Rhys finally decided that it was time for the greatest war this world had seen to begin. The Duke was not against this decision and clenched his hand into a fist and suggested that the hero do so. He would be sure to relay Rhys's message to the king. The Duke couldn't wait to see the look on that cocky old fart's face when he heard all this. Alicia and Irina were shocked when they found out that the hero had invited the king and other nobles to the party. But the maid replied that there could be no mistake, for she had heard it with her own ears. It became clear to Irina why the Duke had left in such a hurry, and Alicia asked her to tell them more about it. Alicia's eyes sparkled with delight. She decided that she shouldn't have wasted her time, and she needed to contact her spies. Irina looked at Alicia in all seriousness and said that they needed to talk. Alicia assumed that Irina wanted to talk about her capture of the devilish dragon people. Irina shook her head negatively and said that she had definite thoughts on the matter. She understood the reason why Alicia did that, but she wanted to talk about something else. Irina wanted to discuss the biggest obstacle in the way of the Risadono, or rather the biggest obstacle in their way. Her conversation turned to the king, which surprised Selishia. Irina had seen his power with her own eyes when the beastmen nation was destroyed. The girl mentally went back to the events that happened to her 10 years ago. Back then, she told her grandfather that she would also fight, but the grandfather exclaimed that she could not do that. They fought their surprise attack alliance consisting of nobles using magic. Irina couldn't stand it and ran off into the forest, calling her grandfather hurtful nicknames. Grandfather reached forward and asked Princess Irina to stop. As Irina ran away, she thought about her dead family members. She lost her brother, sister, and mother. Holding back her tears, Irina stopped and decided that she had to fight to protect her people. At that moment, little Irina heard a noise nearby. She looked back in horror and wondered if they had made it this far. She heard a noise coming from the direction of a large tree with a lush crown. Irina climbed higher up that tree to get a good look at the surroundings nearby. Looking closer, the girl noticed her father surrounded by strangers. Apparently, they were nobles who had been hunting him for a long time. They asked the beastman not to think that he would be fine if he hid in the deepest part of the forest. Such people couldn't understand the thinking of useless commoners, let alone beasts like him. But the nobles felt that they should have surrendered to them long ago. One of the men almost felt sorry for these beasts ruled by such a foolish king. With these words, he roughly stepped his foot on the head of one of the captured beastmen. Irene's father could agree that he was a terrible king who could not protect his men. But still, he was not such a terrible fighter. In the blink of an eye, he approached the offending beastman and cut off his head in one fell swoop. The nobles were surprised that their physical barrier didn't work against the beastman king. He was too fast, so one of the men ordered the others to use different magic and utilize the magical barrier to protect their allies. Irina's father exclaimed that it was too late and went to attack. Right in front of Irina's eyes, her father blew all the nobles' heads off in an instant. Irina was thrilled and admired her father at that moment. Her father left one survivor and ordered him to go home and tell their king that they were coming for them. Before the frightened nobleman could answer him, a mysterious stranger blew his head off. He told Irina's father that it was not necessary to use a messenger. Irina couldn't understand where she got that nasty feeling and goosebumps. Turning back, the man saw a stranger hovering above him that he had come to see the king of the beastmen. The king could not believe his eyes and assumed that the king of Noja himself was before him. Irina's father asked him what he was doing here. The king replied to the man that this was his reward for killing these scum, even though he was not a magician himself. The long-bearded old man warned that he was a very busy man and suggested that the king of the beastmen come to him soon. Irene's father pounced on the intruder and ordered him not to underestimate him. Breathlessly, Irina watched as her father went on the attack. She saw the way her angry father's hand pierced the body of the Nojan king. Or rather, Irina thought that her father had killed the king and had time to be happy about it. But her face changed drastically when she took a better look at the situation. The old man pierced through the body of the beastman with his bare hand. He smirked and suggested that the beastman king had no more strength. When the body of Irene's father fell to the ground, the Nojan king told him that he was a complete disappointment. He thought he would just undermine this entire region. Before he could finish speaking, he heard some noise behind him and turned around. The king noticed a small Irina looking at him with a look of anger. The old man thought it was interesting. He vanished into thin air, offering to let the beastmen suffer as long as they wanted. Irina told Alicia that he had left them alive, and probably thought there was nothing they could do even if they didn't die. Alicia looked at Irina with a look full of regret, but Irina smiled cheerfully and told her not to worry about it. She now had Rizdono and everyone else on her side, so she had no doubt that they would defeat the king no matter what. Meanwhile, the king of Noja and the murderer of Irina's father was at his place in the capital of the kingdom. The long-bearded old man thought of the ribald Babalin and a gloating smirk appeared on his face. He thought the whole thing was quite interesting. The border of the kingdom of Noja and the barony of Babalin has been tainted with many evil deeds. Now its territory was about to become a safe haven for terrorists. All this in spite of the fact that this guy apparently didn't understand anything. Meanwhile, it seemed even scary to Rhys that their affairs were going well. But one of the maids thought that it was all due to the Lord's excellent foresight. Rhys asked to dispense with such compliments. After all, it was all thanks to people like them who believed in him. However, he really was quite good. After all, he was able to show his good side and build trust with everyone. The hero was having quite a bit of fun, so he was going to throw a party not only with the other nobles, but also with the king himself. He assumed that the king himself would praise him for it. Rhys was told that the dragon buffet wouldn't please the royal family members, so it was worth considering something else. Anyway, it was great that all his people wanted to help with the preparations, even though they hated the nobles like crazy, except for Rhys himself. The hero heard that they even worked overtime to get everything ready for the party. Still, it was a good chance for everyone to rally together. At the same time, there was an audience with the king in the royal palace of Noja. The nobles were shocked and didn't understand how Rhys dared to send a letter to the king inviting him to his territory. They all unanimously decided that His Highness should have been executed by the Rise. In fact, the fact that he was a Baybalon was already a reason for execution. The king asked everyone to calm down and agreed that the Rise did lack a bit of tact. But he was a hero who had defeated the dragon. The king of the kingdom of Noja was named Jardabert, who was already over 130 years old. In addition, Rhys mentioned King Jardabert in his letter. He wanted the king to come here and see his territory with his own eyes. Baybalon was known for being practically a wasteland, so he was really indirectly asking for the king's help. Still, one of the nobles wasn't happy with the hero doing it so unacceptably. The king replied to the nobleman that interrupting him while he was speaking was even more unacceptable. The man looked fearfully at the king, not knowing what to say in response to his misbehavior. The king's soldiers silently marched toward one of the nobles. They grabbed him by the arms and dragged him aside. The man called out to His Highness and begged for clemency. His screams were abruptly cut short when one of the knights cut off the ignorant nobleman's head in full view of everyone. The rest of the men pretended not to notice this, and the king invited them to continue their audience. The king was not averse to honoring the request of the Rise, for they were supposed to reward those who did good deeds. Be that as it may, the king was a busy man and he could not go there on his own. Having said this, the king called out to the 48th prince. The 48th prince, Johan Noja, was only 13 years old. The king stunned him with the news that he would go to the territory of Baybalon in his place. The prince was not thrilled, for Baybalon was a place where a bunch of weirdos gathered in the middle of nowhere. The guy was born and bred in the city, so he preferred better to stay here. The king pretended he didn't hear him and put his palm to his ear. He talked about getting old, so he couldn't hear anymore as well as he used to. But, as it seemed to the king, the prince spoke of not following his orders. A shudder ran through the lad, for he knew the first rule in the kingdom of Noja. Any man who angers the king will be immediately executed. The prince immediately changed his mind and raised his hand up, asking for permission to go to the Baybalon. The king smiled and agreed with him. He also said that the boy was still quite young, so if he died there, it was not a problem. Johan exclaimed that it was rather cruel. When the decision was made, the king said that their meeting was over and ordered everyone gathered to leave his hall. The distraught lad, along with the rest of the nobles, silently headed for the exit. The doors of the huge hall slammed shut and the king was left alone. A smile appeared on his face, which was hidden behind a thick and long beard. The king was so amused that he could not contain himself and laughed at the top of his lungs. The old man thought this was simply charming, for no one could even think of the fact that Rhys dared to call the king himself. The king slammed his palm on his throne several times, thinking that the Riz was asking for his help in this way. The fact that he did not care for such rude actions towards him meant that he was a traitor, ready to make the whole country his enemy. The king believed that Rhys was nothing more than a child who did not think things through. It was safe to say that with the last part, he hit it right on the mark. The king rolled his eyes upward and exclaimed that he had been waiting for someone like Rise for quite some time. He used the Church of Sophia's teachings of forbidding the use of magic towards commoners to encourage discrimination and fill people's hearts with hatred. He conquered the beastmen and dwarf countries, turning their people into slaves to fan the spark of rebellion. All the while, the king chose not to touch Baybalon, despite it being a place for so many traitors. The king exclaimed that he had coveted a man like Rhys for quite some time and passionately. Rhys was a small traitor to the king, and the king hoped that the lad could quench his thirst. The old man asked the Rhys for permission to engage in a touching battle for once. Meanwhile, Johan would be his sacrifice. The king hoped that the Rise would kill him in the worst possible way as revenge against the nobles and allow his death to be the start of the war. Meanwhile, Riz was glowing with happiness as the territory of Baybalon had become quite a pleasant place for him. He was so waiting for the king of Noja to praise him for it. After a month, the hero was going to throw a party in his wonderful castle. People who wanted peace for their nation were to come to the great hero Riza Baybalon. One of the dukes went into a rage and tore up the invitation of Riza. He felt that the guy should not have messed with him and thought he was no good. There were rumors that he had defeated an evil dragon and saved the Django territory, but to them, Rise was just a lowly baron. The duke was willing to bet that he didn't even have a castle and called Rise a liar. His assistant told the man that however Duke Hohenheim had also signed the invitation, so they couldn't just ignore him. The disgruntled Duke bellowed at the old man that he knew that very well, yet this invitation was nothing more than a way to provoke them. The Duke assumed that they most likely had some sort of secret strategy. After thinking for a bit, the man had a great idea in his head on how to avoid all the risks and still take care of this garbage. The Duke told his aide that they would certainly respond and delivered his message. A month later, the hero received a letter from them. It said that as unfortunate as it was, his eldest son and he would not be able to appear at their party due to some health problems. So the Duke's youngest son would take their place. The Duke asked Rhys to train him well, using his high status, which is far superior to that of a baron, as an example. The hero chuckled smugly and thought that apparently he really respected him. But Rhys was the kind of idiot who didn't understand sarcasm. Alicia approached the hero and asked if he was done with checking the guest list. The hero replied that he had done everything and the guests were expected to arrive soon. As Alicia bowed down to the Riz, the guy kept his eyes on her lush forms, which were just huge as always. Rhys thought it was strange that all the lords and their eldest sons got sick at the same time, so he assumed that there was some new disease going around right now. He could make himself look good by using healing magic. Alicia exclaimed that it would be perfect, as it would allow them to prepare even better for the moment of truth. They had to visit the Babylon so that the whole world would know how great the Babylon was. At this point, one of the maids came into the room of the Riz and apologized for the disturbance. The fact was that the dragon riders had reported that some guests had already entered the grounds. Rhys got up from his seat and said that he had to get ready and greet them. Rhys left his office and headed down the corridors. Meanwhile, the maid followed him. The lords and their eldest sons decided not to participate and instead sent Rhys their younger and even illegitimate children. They were a bunch of troubled children, some of whom couldn't even use magic. Irina believed that as expected from the trash of this country, they were just trying to get rid of the trouble. Alicia smiled and admitted that she was actually thinking about the fact that Rhys had seen it coming. They were neglected day after day and perhaps even abused. Irina realized that these children were just like them. Alicia believed that Rhys herself planned to take care of all the sorrows in their hearts. She was 500,000,000% trying to make it sound better than it was. She held out her hand to Irina herself and offered to go since the party would be starting soon. Meanwhile, walking down the hallway, Rhys apologized to Klaus for distracting him from beefing up security measures for the party. Klaus smiled and asked him not to thank him, especially since Belle had told him to be by Rhys's side throughout the party anyway. Belle supposed it was probably presumptuous of her to do so, but their top priority was to keep the Lord safe at all times. Still, they were dealing with the children of nobles, and there had to be at least one or two weirdos among them. Rhys clapped Klaus on the back and said that he was counting on them in that case. Rhys mentally laughed and decided that was definitely good material. As they were walking down the hallway, the hero heard the screams of an unknown man. He was insistently asking to finally see the lord of this territory. It seemed to Rhys that there was already some kind of problem there. He wanted to know what was going on and approached the maid, who hesitated to answer and did not know how to answer Mr. Rhys. The guy who came here from the King of Nozer realized that Riz Babylon was standing in front of him and grinned. He pointed his finger at Mr. Riz and asked what was going on with this castle. The hero suggested that he didn't like this beautiful castle that everyone had helped him build. Klaus slowly reached for the hilt of his sword, but the maid threw a hard stare at him. Rhys didn't understand what he was talking about since they just used the same design as the royal castles. He asked the guy to be careful with his words or else the royal family members might get angry with the young man. The guy was shocked at this response. Johan lost his temper and exclaimed that he himself was a member of the royal family, but he was willing to bet that the Rhys must have known about it. The hero grabbed his head, not believing his ears. He didn't even know that Johan was a member of the royal family, and this guy looked like an asshole. But Rhys didn't want to piss him off and thought hard about what he could say to him. He smiled at the prince and said it was just a little joke. Rhys asked to understand that he always thought that the good upbringing of a member of the royal family would be seen immediately. Johan exclaimed that the hero was a real freak, for he wanted to say by this that Johan was not like a member of the royal family. Rhys didn't understand why the guy was getting angrier, because he didn't say anything like that he wanted to call Johan a real idiot. But he was a man of character, so he had to be calmer. Rhys laughed and thought that the prince was apparently getting tired. He suggested he apply Rhys's healing magic to his head. Johan was beyond angry and was about to finish Rhys off on the spot. Johan asked him not to tell him that the hero had copied the royal palace, so also painted it black. It was horrible and Johan didn't understand what the hero was thinking. The guy was so surprised when he saw how developed the place was, but was even more surprised when he saw its stupid castle. The hero thought that this castle must have reminded Johan of his home, but the guy ordered him to shut up. Started to think the hero was planning to rebel against the kingdom of MANHWA or something. The hero was shocked at his conclusion and didn't understand how he could come to it after seeing the castle built to honor the royal family. He decided that Johan had completely lost his mind. Johan turned back to the other children, with the hope that they would say something to the Reese. Mr. Reese didn't even notice the other children. Apparently they were confused and didn't know what to say. One of them admitted that he didn't care about what was going on in this country. The second guy thought that the Babylonians would probably finish them off. The third guy thought there was no point in this life anyway. Apparently Johan was not the only problem here. All Reese saw in front of him was a flashy brat and droopy-eyed kids. After a little thought, Reese realized this. Their parents wanted the hero to train their children. That's why they sent them here. In that case, the hero had a plan. Suddenly, Alicia approached Mr. Reese and snapped her fingers and ordered them to detain them. It happened so quickly that the hero didn't even realize anything. At the same instant, Klaus was behind one of the children and kicked him in the back. The rest of the subordinates in dark robes helped Klaus straighten up the rest of the children. The hero was in shock looking at this picture and didn't understand what was going on. Alicia looked at the hero with a wide smile and asked Mr. Reese to leave everything to her. She was going to train them properly like he wanted. The guy didn't know if it was good or bad, but he unsurely thanked Alicia for her help. Reese wanted to ask her to be more careful, but at that moment Irina came up to them and told the hero that everything would be alright because she would help Alicia. The guy frowned, for this worried him even more. For some reason he felt that after them, their AQ would become lower. Alicia agreed with Irina and suggested that they detain the other guests and send them to the underground temple. Guy thought that as long as the children didn't die, after all, he could restore them with his healing magic. For now, he should have thought about the party. After a while, Johan slowly opened his eyes, not realizing where he was. He saw other royal children sitting across from him, tied to chairs. None of them realized where they were or what was going to happen to them, but each of them was scared witless. They saw two crazy ladies who were inordinately happy that the kids were finally awake. Johan tried to get rid of the shackles with magic, but he failed. Alicia put a small knife to his throat and advised them not to move. As long as they were well behaved, she wasn't going to kill them. Johan did not understand what she was up to. He assumed that Alicia intended to harm him even though she knew that he was a member of the royal family. Johan threatened Alicia that if she did anything to him, his father would not forgive her. Irina stood in front of the guy and told the young man that it wouldn't work that way. If he wanted to become a good person, he shouldn't rely on his parents so immediately. Johan was surprised to see the beastmen here and asked about their plans and what their goals were. Irina smiled and said that it was pretty obvious. They were going to correct their thinking for the future of this country. Irina wasn't sure if the children were satisfied with the way things were and asked them a question. She asked them to be braver and wanted to hear their thoughts. Johan was completely confused and didn't understand what Irina needed. He confessed that he actually hated his father who did to him and whatever he wanted. He also hated the other nobles who mocked him for being the youngest prince. After saying those words, Johan didn't realize what had happened to him, for his mouth was moving on its own. He immediately thought that Irina had done something to him. Alicia smirked and admitted that they used a drug that forced him to be honest to train him properly. Johan was horrified that these people gave him some strange drug without any hesitation and decided that these people were the real terrorists. Irina cheerfully put her hand up and invited the other guys to hear their opinions. One of the kids exclaimed that he hated his parents and hated his family and hated the whole aristocracy. Others thought that being a talented mage was optional. A third wished only that he didn't have to be beaten. The fourth child only wished for the death of those who mocked him. Alicia laughed and exclaimed that this was wonderful, for true desires were coming out into the light. In that case, she offered to let the children become tainted with hatred. She suggested that they let their intentions to kill become wild and let their just anger be released. Johan tried to convince himself to the last that his father was wonderful, and he could not help but hate him. But then he changed his mind again and exclaimed that he would like to kill the old fart and all his older brothers. Alicia exclaimed that they should have valued their ideals highly and let their greed consume them and make their own way. Besides, they could get the power granted to Riza herself to do it. With these words, Alicia stuck a syringe into Johan's neck and injected the medicine inside. The boy felt a sudden burst of energy and a couple of veins popped out of his face. With wild screams, Johan was able to break the shackles that bound his legs and arms in an instant. The boy did not realize what was happening to him, for he was overflowing with power and it was marvelous. He felt like he was reborn. Irina's eyes lit up with delight when she realized what Alicia had injected him with. The girl replied that it was an enhancing drug they had developed by processing samples taken from those infected with the dragon virus. It was no longer contagious, but could still improve magical and physical powers. Alicia suggested that the kids go and show off their new powers to their parents, siblings, and friends. Thus the children gained fighting spirit and agreed with Alicia. Just at this moment the hero was approaching the door and heard the loud cheers of the children. Reese was worried and came over to see how it was going, but by all appearances they were doing well. Reese was sure that their parents would be happy about it. Still, the hero couldn't stop thinking about the party. Apparently, he was the only one who didn't realize how bad it was. Further events took place in the castle of Babylon on the day after the party. The hero looked outside from the window and thought that the guests had already reached home. Suddenly, Irina hung upside down in front of him and agreed with his assumption. She alerted that they had sent some guards after them, so their journey home should have gone smoothly. The girl gave Reese a terrible fright. He didn't understand why she always entered through the window. Besides, she clearly shouldn't have been hanging upside down in her outfit, for it was bad for his heart. Just by looking at her outfit, Reese immediately blushed and tried to restrain himself. In any case, he was quite impressed with their training program. Irina put her hands behind her head and replied that their brainwashing training program was nothing special. Reese smirked and told her not to be modest. Their guests were troubled children to begin with, and yet it was amazing to hear them say such words. They thanked Reese's dear little brother heartily for inviting them to his party. Reese had no doubt that now their parents would think better of him and the king would be in his pocket, especially since Johan was a prince that he also attended his party. The hero couldn't wait to see how their parents would react, and Irina agreed with him. But in fact, everything happened far from the way Reese had imagined. Upon arrival, one of the sons terrified his father, who fell to the floor and reminded the boy that they were a family. The boy rudely ordered him to shut up and told him that they were not a family at all, as he had been treating him like garbage the whole time. In addition, the guy found out that his father planned to kill him if he came alive from the Babylon. The father was so horrified that he didn't know how to respond to this. The son grabbed his father by the hair and said that his idiot soldiers told him that. He had no idea that he could have disliked his father so much. The kid lifted his father by the hair with inhuman strength and told him that he only had one family. From now on, the lad considered the Church of the Demiurge as his family. With these words, he killed his father without a second thought. That day, the children who had been treated horribly by their relatives became the heads of their respected families by the most horrible means possible. Shortly thereafter, the following events occurred. The men in robes turned to the people and asked them to listen attentively, for it was their duty to honor God the Demiurge, the creator of all things. According to them, the goddess Sophia was nothing more than a lie invented by the royal family. A real god would never discriminate against his own people. People should have been aware of the fact that magic was a tool given to them by God to guide people with love and understanding. After this speech, one of the men took off his hood and revealed his face. The blonde-haired fellow smiled at the young men and women and suggested that people should turn to demiurgism. In principle, people were willing to agree that they were right, but these people were going against the laws of the royal family. The people were afraid that if they contacted them, the Lord could send their heads into the air. The fellow who had previously killed his father asked the people to listen to him. He notified the people that his father and brother had died last night, so he took over as head of the family and lord of the territory. The boy was going to tell them the details a little later, but there is a small change that he had to notify them as soon as possible. The boy stated that he had decided to give his full support to the Church of the Demiurge. Unlike the Church of Sophia, the Church of the Demiurge teaches that the true nobleman used magic for the sake of his men. It was through their teachings that he was able to see their true God. The guy was probably hallucinating from the drug, and for that reason, from now on, he would use his magic for other people. The guy raised his hand up and showed the men his magic. One of the men asked the others to welcome the new lord. The people had no reason left to resist, so everyone welcomed the new lord and the Church of the Demiurge. While the young lord was encouraging the men to make this decision, a certain old man appeared behind him, wanting to know about the current situation. The guy turned back and saw the high priest of the Church of Sophia in front of him. The high priest wanted to know what the youngest son of the Lord, who was mostly not even on the path to success, was thinking. By agitating people in this way, the priest warned the child that more than punishment awaited him. The priest also turned to all the people and exclaimed that they too were all guilty. He did not understand how they all dared to disregard the teachings of the state religion and ordered them to know their place. The high priest ordered his soldiers to cut up a couple people and teach them a lesson. He was going to make sure that the lord of the territory would later realize why they did this. The soldiers listened to the order and pounced on the unarmed men. The soldiers didn't even have time to do anything before they fell face down on the ground dead. The priest looked at the boy in fury and suggested that he was planning to rebel against an entire nation. He warned him that the king's army was coming for him. The lad smirked and said that if he was the only one doing it, then maybe that was it. But his named brothers had to have made their move by then too. Guy ordered the high priest to be taken away and several men took the old man under the arms. The old man looked back at the hooded men and ordered the heretics to let him go. The little lord exclaimed that it was all for the sake of the robe of Sama and the church of the demiurge. A couple days later, the hero decided to look at the letters from his guests. The letter stated that thanks to the power they had bestowed upon them, the lad was able to secure his position as head of the family. The second letter also thanked the dear savior Riza himself. Thanks to his church, their territory became such a cozy place that it was hard to believe it. The third letter referred to the hero as God's apostle to the Riza, thanks to the wonderful church that they provided them, who preach about the future extermination of the aristocracy. The guy could appreciate every day as a blessing. Reese was thrilled that he still continued to receive these thank you letters from the children. Still, he had been right to leave their training to Alicia and Irina. The maid bowed to the Lord and said that in addition to these letters, they also received many reports that spoke of the favorable state of affairs in each region. Reese already realized that their affairs were going quite well and chuckled. He was glad that the Baybalin's value was increasing again and hoped that his father was watching. Now he probably wouldn't consider him worthless now. Earlier his father had told him about the hero making up a lot and it was discouraging. So as he left, he had to watch how he spoke and behaved. That way, his father thought, people would get it wrong and think that Reese was clever. Father's opinion of Reese was exactly in the bull's eye. All that was left to take care of was Sophia's church. Reese thought it would be nice if people thought they were just a bunch of heretics. The maid smiled and replied to the master that it was fine, since Alicia was already doing it herself. Meanwhile, Alicia was in the church of the demiurge. The girl silently walked down the large staircase and opened the doors to a dark, sparsely lit room. Outside the doors, the girl met the enraged apostles of the goddess Sophia, who did not understand how they dared to do this to them. They believed that the god would punish the heroes for what they had done. Alicia smiled at first, but then laughed so that her large breasts heaved upward several times. The girl told the apostles that they had been held captive for quite a long time, but yet she still hadn't been punished. She asked them to give it up and asked at what time their goddess Sophia would come to their aid. The girl angered the attendants even more, who started calling her foul language. They thought that she did not know her place, for she belonged to some insignificant church that had been banished long ago. People thought King Jarbert would pay them for it. The apostles believed that the king would notice that something was wrong and send a bunch of knights to rescue them. Alicia exhaled heavily and said that they kept relying on people above them, like a king or a goddess. She compared them to a bunch of babies, unable to do anything on their own. The people got even more angry and ordered her to repeat what she had just said. No sooner had the terrified high priest looked up from his hat than Alicia's sharp knife made a hole in it. The second knife she threw at his aid, however, stabbed into the wall and left a cut on the apostle's cheek. Looking at their worried faces, Alicia became amused. She warned that if they kept rolling scenes, her target next time might be a little different. Alicia had never talked about it with other believers before, but there were times when she did regret being born into a family of demiurgic church members. She resented her parents who were executed by order of the Church of Sophia just because people thought they were a nuisance. She hated the demiurge god without even knowing if he existed or not. But one day she met him. She met the wonderful, wise and kind Rise Babal Samu. Though being a nobleman, he welcomed the Church of the Demiurge into his territory. He built them a castle, gave them freedom to practice their doctrines, and gave them a happy life from day to day. So they were all now terribly grateful to the Demiurge, for it was because of the Demiurge that such a beautiful man was born, who surpasses even God. Alicia clutched her cheeks flaming with happiness and exclaimed that her faith had never been so strong. The high priest stared at the woman in horror and exclaimed that she was definitely insane. One of the ministers of the Church of Sophia gritted his teeth and said that this priestess had lost her mind because she supported the lower strata. There could be no mistake here. The ministers were sure that the Lord of the Riz must have used this woman to conquer an entire nation. Alicia laughed out loud and exclaimed that it was time for their little experiment. She suggested that the boys try many different things to improve the devil's dragonizing drug. The girl felt she had to try as hard as she could so that the man she loved even more than God would love her back. The high priest ordered her to get behind him and asked her to stop. Meanwhile, it was already deep into the night. The younger prince appeared in the royal palace of Noja that he made his way to the king's room. On his way, he did not hesitate to kill the man who stood in his way. The boy shouted at the king and ordered Jarbert to die. He was going to kill the king for the sake of his brother Rais Sama. The king was delighted and squealed that this was just wonderful. He never thought that a worthless man like the prince would dare to stand up against him. The boy swung his fist and went to attack the old fart, ordering him to shut up. Owenheim glanced outside the window. It was raining heavily outside, and a terrible thunderstorm was rolling across the sky. He pronounced that 23 territories had been affected by the coup d'etat. He was delighted with his wonderful dear friend and exclaimed that his skills were simply out of this world. His faithful attendant bowed to Owenheim and reported that another duke and baron had fallen. The man didn't even notice how she managed to get back. Owenheim asked if there was any negative impact from the sudden change of power. The fact that the new lords all belonged to the Church of the Demiurge helped lessen any detrimental effects of this sudden change. Moreover, by kidnapping the highest officials of the church, they were able to minimize the general anxiety of the people. Owenheim praised the girl for her good work. The man smiled and said that the time had come and he had to make his move as soon as possible. He asked to tell all the agents to hurry up and get ready. They would be working together with the new lords, his dear friend's apprentices. Another girl appeared behind, who approached the first one and whispered some information in her ear. Judging from her gaze, this information greatly surprised the girl. She immediately reported to Owenheim that there was an incident in the royal castle, for Prince Johan had rebelled. With loud cries, Prince Johan swung at the old man. His fist reached for the king's face and the guy screamed that the guy annoyed the hell out of him. Dodging the blow, the old man laughed and admitted that he was happy to hear it from his lips. Dodging more blows, the king smiled at the guy. He said he couldn't hold back any longer after seeing how charming Johan was. The prince was about to throw a punch at the old man, but the king jumped back. This made the guy terribly angry and he ordered the king to stand still. The king smirked and used his connection technique called Tyrant Armor. His body began to be covered in lightning and a wind tornado swirled around his long beard and robes. His eyes burned in impatience and he suggested the boy finally do it. The king approached the little prince with lightning speed and punched him in the stomach with all his might. His blow was so strong that the boy's body broke through the palace walls and the prince flew outside. With joyous laughter, the king jumped out after him. The king exclaimed that his son had changed in the best way he could imagine and he was to reward Johan for it. The old man raised his hands up and used the joining technique, the judgment of the Titan. At the same moment, a huge block of earth appeared high above his head. The king turned to his son Johan and all the people in the capital. He pointed the huge block, the size of an entire city, at the ground and ordered everyone to accept his love. The people who were in the distance noticed a huge boulder that looked like a meteorite flying toward the city. Prince Johan activated his demonic power that Mr. Reese had given him. The prince could accept that the king attacked him, but he couldn't let all those innocent people in the capital get caught up in the disaster. Dragon wings grew behind the boy's back. Johan was furious that after such an act, the old man dared to call himself king. Johan flew straight towards the big block of earth and exclaimed that he would protect people's lives. As a prince and more importantly, as a disciple of the one and only brother of Riza Sama, he would do so. Johan put all his strength and rage into his fist and struck the meteorite. The huge block of earth that was several thousand times the size of the guy began to crack. The guy's hands were drenched in blood and Johan was in immense pain. Nevertheless, he did not intend to stop and repeatedly struck the lump with new blows. The guy's hands suffered more and more, but new cracks began to appear on the huge meteorite. While the guy was desperately trying to deal with the meteorite, he only dreamed that people would recognize him. He wanted them to say that Johan had something to offer them. And above all, the prince wanted to follow in the footsteps of Reese and become a ruler adored by his people. Johan once again struck the meteorite, and the huge block began to split apart. At some point, the meteorite lit up with a bright light and split into small pieces. Falling down along with the meteorite shards, the guy smiled, happy that he was able to do it. Johan was left powerless and collapsed into the castle walls from a great height. The king landed after him, and he was able to enjoy himself a little. He could praise the boy for withstanding his attack, for the king did not hold back. The king approached the wounded guy and asked to understand that he had been longing for someone like that for a very long time. He was waiting for a rebel who could entertain even him as the strongest man. Ree's indeed exceeded all his expectations. The king meant that except for him, no one would have thought of such things. The old man never thought that the hero would turn the brat into a monster and send him back to kill the king. He had no doubt that there was definitely something wrong with Ree since he had gotten the idea. The king grabbed the boy's face with his huge palm and exclaimed that this was a real surprise. This was the first time in his life that he had not been able to foresee events. The king lifted his own son Johan by the head and said he would spare him, as the lad had succeeded in amusing him. The king frantically wrapped his head in different directions and ordered the lad to go back to Babylon and tell his dear friend that he did not mind making the greatest war. With these words, he launched the Johan into the sky with all his might. The old man looked up at the sky, where a bright star from his flight was now shining in place of Johan. The king admitted that the boy was quite good, even though he was his son. Meanwhile, the hero yawned sweetly and said that the place was quite peaceful. Together with Klaus and the maid, they were in the garden of the Babylon castle. This place was full of weirdos, but there had been no fights here lately. The hero assumed it was all due to the good example he was setting. Ree looked up in surprise at the pile of earth beneath where someone's voice had come from. The female voice sniffed and exclaimed that it smelled Ree himself. The head of a satisfied Alicia appeared from the excavated earth, and together with her several other hooded people came out. Ree speculated that she was originally a mole that had evolved perfectly into a human. Alicia clutched her flaming cheeks as usual and exclaimed that Ree was being ridiculous. She was actually in the process of digging underground tunnels in preparation for a possible enemy attack. Klaus' maids were as surprised as the hero to see Alicia here. Eventually, the girl planned to dig a tunnel from her house to Mr. Reese's room. In that case, Reese recalled that his room was on the 3rd floor. Alicia was so disappointed that she drenched her digging with tears. She was a bit noisy, but quite amusing. Thanks to her, Reese remembered how good it was to be a man with common sense like him. Meanwhile, Klaus noticed something in the sky and asked Reese to take a look at it. The hero thought it was a shooting star. As far as he remembered, he had to say his wish 3 times. The guy thought he needed a real heroine, or rather, he needed a real antagonist. Alicia also looked at the shooting star in surprise. It seemed to her that it was heading right here. As soon as the shooting star got closer to them, the boys saw that it was Prince Johan. Klaus was going to protect the Reese, so he fenced him in with his arm and took him back a little. But Reese was absolutely terrified when Prince Johan crashed at full speed into the roof of his castle and destroyed it.